Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through a blanket of stars above the ancient desert. There's a hush to the world here, just the low whisper of warm wind and the soft crunch of your sandals on sand as you move through the shadows of the cradle of civilization. Babylon's shining and secretive stretches out before you like a dream carved in mud brick and flickering firelight. The scent of oil lamps lingers in the air. Camels grunt somewhere behind a low wall. A dog barks and is quickly shushed. The night is wide and full of secrets, but none so strange as what's being scratched out by moonlight onto clay. Just beyond the gate, tucked between the rising shapes of ziggurats and shadowy palm groves, a group of scribes crouch near the fire. They aren't praying, they aren't storytelling, they are doing math. You blink. Wait, is that what you came here for, Babylonian math? Don't worry, you probably won't survive this without a little brain melt, but trust me, it gets weirder. And oddly soothing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget, post your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fire crackles as a boy flips a fresh clay tablet onto his lap. His stylus carved from reed taps against his teeth before diving down to press marks into the soft surface. The others watch him, some whispering, some mimicking the motion in the air, solving invisible problems. The tablet reads, like a riddle, a field, the length is unknown. The width is known, the area is known. Find the length, you tilt your head. Is this a math word problem from 4000 years ago? Yes, welcome to Mesopotamia, land of mud and math. You sit quietly as an older scribe leans in, correcting the boy's form, not just his numbers, but the angle of his stylus. That matters. If the wedge isn't clean, the whole equation can be misread. In a world without erasers, every mark is forever. And math, it's not just academic here, it's spiritual. Behind you, a procession of priests in linen robes carries offerings toward a ziggurat. Up its staircase they climb, heading toward the stars literally. The Babylonians didn't separate numbers from the divine. Counting was holy, measuring was sacred. Calculating the movement of stars was like reading the breath of the gods. Historians still argue whether Babylonian math developed primarily for religion or for agriculture. But standing here surrounded by temple chants and multiplication tables carved into clay, you wonder if that's even a real difference. Crops fed people, stars guided planting. Math made both predictable, or at least it tried to. The night sky above is painfully crisp. No light pollution, no planes, just ancient constellations watching over this open-air school of numbers. You lie back for a second, letting the chills seep through your tunic, and realize how easy it would be to fall asleep right here, counting stars instead of sheep. A younger child toddles over to the group of scribes and plops down, watching them with sleepy fascination. His father hands him a bit of clay and helps him make the simplest mark, a single wedge. That's the number 1. Then 2 wedges. That's 2. Easy enough, but it won't stay easy. Babylonian numbers are in base 60. That means instead of counting up by tens like we do, they group things in 60s. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. That system, it's theirs. You're still living in it. A teenager rolls his eyes as he has to divide something into sevens. His teacher sighs. Even back then, nobody liked dividing by 7. It results in an endless string of non-repeating digits. They couldn't even write all the numbers down they had to estimate. You feel his pain. Some things never change. And here's the quirky bit, their tablets were baked afterward. Once your math was done, it was immortalized. Your mistakes were permanent. No pressure. A loud yawn escapes one of the students, and the teacher frowns, then chuckles. Better a sleepy scribe than a lazy one, he mutters. Apparently, math class has always had its casualties. You stretch, blink at the stars, and lean closer. A new tablet is being inscribed, this one with a word problem involving a canal, some goats, and a surprising amount of algebra. No numbers, just relationships between things. Babylonian math is weirdly poetic. A goat eats a certain amount of grass. The canal carries a certain flow of water. How wide should the field be if we want the goats to graze but not get swept away? You can't tell if it's math or a fable, but either way, it's surprisingly calming. There's something about watching people solve ancient problems with nothing more than dirt and a stick. You reach down and take up a bit of spare clay and start pressing in wedges. 1, 2, 3. Before long, your own sleepy number line is taking shape. It may not mean anything, but it connects you to something deeply, curiously human. And as the ziggurat looms behind you, shadows flickering across its massive face, you realize math of all things has lulled you into a trance. A world where counting is divine, where stars sing in units of 60, where every mistake gets baked into history, and where somehow lying under Mesopotamian stars with a clay tablet makes more sense than your last algebra test. The city wakes before the sun as it always has. Somewhere a rooster crows with impressive self-importance. You stir from your clay-paved dreams, brushing imaginary grit from your tunic, and find yourself walking through the morning mist that clings low to the streets of Babylon. The city is alive, but in a soft, murmuring way. Nothing abrupt, nothing rushed. Just carts squeaking under woven mats, sleepy goats shaking dust from their coats, and the low hum of people doing the thing Babylonians arguably loved most: organizing things. Today you're headed toward the heart of all that calculation. Not the temples, not the farms, but something in between the scribal quarter. Here, nestled between incense sellers and barley counters, the schools of numbers buzz to life. You follow a boy about your age, give or take 3 centuries, who's clutching a fresh clay tablet like it's his only passport to adulthood. He ducks under a hanging reed mat and into the scribe's courtyard. You hesitate just a second before slipping in behind him. Inside, the walls are lined with baskets of tablets, some cracked, some still drying. There's no chalkboard, no calculators, and not a pencil in sight. But somehow knowledge flows here like the Euphrates. You plop down on a woven mat, your legs crisscrossed, watching as the day's first lesson begins. The teacher is wiry-bearded and looks like he's been disappointed by numbers more than once. He clears his throat and announces, "Today we remember why the number 60 is holy." And oh boy, do they remember. It turns out 60 is the Swiss Army knife of ancient math. It divides evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's rare and useful, especially when your daily life involves carving up land, distributing grain, or counting celestial cycles. You glance around the room. Even the young students know this already. They chant it like a song: 60 is best. 60 is clean, 10 fingers and 6 rows. 60 is seen. It rhymes better in Akkadian, probably. Historians still argue whether the base 60 system was created from astronomical necessity or because counting on knuckles and phalanges just worked better. Picture this. Each of your 4 fingers, not the thumb, has 3 visible bone segments. Multiply that by 5 fingers, and you've got 12. Use your thumb as a pointer to track those segments and your other hand to count how many groups of 12 you've ticked off. 5 times 12, you guessed it, 60. That method still works today. It's oddly meditative. You try it under your breath, thumb tapping knuckles like a secret spell. 12, 24, 36. Around you, students are solving problems. A trader brings in a query. "I have 60 jars of sesame oil. I sell 3 for 2 shekels. How many shekels will I have if I sell them all?" You blink. You weren't told there'd be a quiz. One girl pipes up with the answer almost instantly. She's 10. You're impressed. Her hands are caked in clay, her braid swings like a pendulum as she scrawls her solution. She's fast because she doesn't multiply like you do. Babylonians used tables, pre-written lists of squares and reciprocals, and handy shortcuts. Memorized, whispered, written and rewritten until they lived in the body. No long columns of multiplication here. Just look it up, flip your stylus, and stab in the answer. But it's not all clean and clever. You hear a thud. A tablet has cracked in half. A boy groans. His calculation ruined. The teacher nods solemnly. "Math has consequences," he mutters. As the courtyard heats up, a group of older students move toward the temple steps, their tablets tucked under their arms like sacred scrolls. You follow. Up on the higher terraces, the priest mathematicians gather. These are the elite calculators, the ones who use numbers to chart the heavens. They speak in hushed tones about the position of Venus, the rise of Sirius, the troubling pattern of eclipses. Here, math isn't just trade and taxes, it's prophecy. They consult sky charts, rows of symbols detailing when stars will appear and what omens they carry. Math predicts fate here. You overhear one priest whisper, "The moon lags by 2 degrees. The king should not travel next month." You blink. 2 degrees of moon means stay home. That's some serious math-powered anxiety. But it's not so different from your world, is it? The stars still rule us: horoscopes in coffee shop newspapers, Mercury and retrograde memes, moon phases on fitness apps. We've traded clay tablets for phone screens, but the habit's the same: math as map and mirror. As the sun climbs, you descend into a shaded market alley. A fruit seller catches your eye and offers a date for a smile. You take it. Chewy, sweet, ancient. The coins she collects have marks for fractions, thirds, and sixths, because again, base 60. You pause at a public tablet post, a kind of ancient billboard. There, etched in firm, practiced wedges, is a multiplication table. It's for children. You recognize the pattern 1x1 equals sign 1, 1x2 equals sign 2, then it speeds up. 5x12 equals sign 1 minute, 6x10 equals sign 1 hour. Oh, right. Babylon didn't just love 60. It structured time itself around it. Your time right now, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. That's Babylonian. Their system got passed to Greeks then, to Romans then, into the bloodstream of the modern world. You lean in and trace a wedge with your fingertip. It's oddly satisfying. You start to wonder if we've overcomplicated things. Maybe we don't need fancy calculators or shiny apps. Maybe all we need is clay stars and the number 60, and possibly a nap. It's later now, and Babylon is humming again this time, not with chants or roosters, but with the steady rhythm of math applied. As the sun filters through latticework screens and gilded awnings, you follow a pair of teenage scribes down a narrow path that smells of roasting onions, clay dust, and the faint sweetness of pressed dates. They're heading somewhere serious, the temple courtyard where astronomer priests gather, not to pray but to count, to track, to record. They carry no scrolls, only tablets. Tablets and an unshakable belief in one simple truth: 60 is sacred. You duck into the courtyard after them and immediately spot the center of attention, a large flat table littered with numerical grids etched in tidy columns. Look at this, one of them whispers, pointing with his stylus. This is where it gets good. And it does, because now you're diving deeper into the mystery of why they chose 60. It's not just because it divides nicely. That's part of it. But it also shows up in weird, whispery ways, like a cosmic Easter egg planted in nature. You sit on a low bench, barely an arm's reach from a priest whose forehead gleams with both sweat and divine purpose. He's speaking to no one in particular, or perhaps to the gods, as he rattles off numbers associated with celestial cycles. Jupiter's orbit, the timing of eclipses, phases of Venus. Most of them strangely fit into base 60 models. Coincidence? Historians still argue whether this is mathematical magic or just obsessive rounding. But here's the real kicker: they didn't use zero. Well, not in the way you'd hope. There's no comfy little zero sitting smugly between 1 and -1. Instead, they had a sort of placeholder, a blank wedge or spacing, to show that nothing was there, but it wasn't quite a full-fledged number. That little circle we rely on today to build everything from long division to binary code. Yeah, Babylon flirted with it, but never committed. Still, what they built without zero is nothing short of mesmerizing. You lean over the table and glance at one particular tablet. It's not poetry, it's a problem, a real problem. Not in the sulfur X way, but in the please help, we might flood the entire city way. It goes something like this. A canal is leaking. We know its length and the amount of water lost per day. If it continues, how many days until the fields dry? Forget test anxiety, this is survival math. Another tablet describes the volume of a grain silo. The scribes had to account for the shape, a cylinder, the angle of tapering walls, and how long the grain would last under various consumption rates. And here's the thing, they got very close to what we now call pi. Not quite 3.14159, but their approximation, roughly 3.125, was good enough to keep the barley flowing and the math teacher from yelling. You smirk. Good enough for barley is good enough for bedtime. A sudden breeze kicks up, rustling the skirts of the temple awnings. You squint upward toward the steps of the ziggurat, and there, moving with slow, deliberate purpose, is a lone priest carrying what looks like a compass. Not the kind that points north. This one's for circles. You follow him up the steps, one flight, then two. Your legs start to complain, but curiosity pulls you upward like a magnet. By the third tier, you can see most of the city: crisscross canals, flat rooftops, sunlit courtyards, and dusty roads where caravans crawl like ants. Up here, geometry gets practical. You watch as the priest kneels beside a stone platform and draws a circle using his tool. Not just any circle, a perfect one. 60 divisions etched around the edge. A 360-degree circle born right here. No joke. Historians still credit the Babylonians with giving us that beautiful, endlessly divisible number. 60 for 1/6 of a circle. 6 segments make a full turn. 6 times 60, 360. You sit beside him as he lays down his stylus and closes his eyes, feeling the sun warm his skin. You copy him. Breathe in the incense from below. Exhale slowly. Your hands still hum with invisible equations. You've never felt so still. Below you, children learn to count, traders shout prices, priests chart the stars. All of it, every word, every deal, every prediction is touched by the same invisible rhythm. 60 pulses, 60 reasons, 60 ways of understanding the world. You think back to your own life, your digital watch, your wall clock, your math teacher's tired jokes, that pop quiz on angles. None of it was invented yesterday. It all began here under the Babylonian sun with Playtime and sleep-deprived scribes who dared to dream in base 60. And it worked. Their math wasn't just arithmetic, it was architecture for reality. You rise slowly, careful not to disturb the etched circle, and begin your descent. Each step of the ziggurat feels like its own little tick of a cosmic clock. One step, 2, 3. You imagine yourself moving through the hours. 12, 24, 30. You're a sundial with legs. You're a wandering shadow on a clay tablet. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel what the Babylonians felt, a sense of time, not as pressure, but as pattern. And patterns are something you can trust. You shuffle back down into the thick of the city where geometry meets goat herding and multiplication tables share real estate with fig stalls. If Babylon has one talent beyond astronomy and empire building, it's applying math to absolutely everything, including stuff you never thought needed math in the first place. You follow the scent of hot bread and barley stew to a small square where merchants are already at work, and not just shouting prices. Oh no, this is full-on mathematical theater. One trader is waving a stylus in the air like a conductor's baton. 5 measures of grain for every 6 measures of oil, he calls. Unless you're paying in silver, then it's 3 for 4. But if your silver's light, he trails off, eyeing the coin like it's an untrustworthy dog. You lean in closer and realize that everyone, buyers, sellers, and that grumpy-looking donkey in the corner, knows ratios. Not vaguely, not as a concept. They use them the way modern folks use discount codes. Fluid, flexible, weaponized commerce. And the math? It's not written down here. It's all in the head, passed down orally, practiced daily, refined like wine or sarcasm. You hear a boy mutter under his breath, 3 shekels of copper equals half a shekel of silver. Then he frowns, unless the weight's off again. He glances at his scale like it's personally betrayed him. You watch an older woman haggle over a cart of dates. She runs through 3 different calculations in a row before settling on a price. Her final offer, a jug of fermented goat milk, 1 sandal repair, and a promise to curse the competition's figs. It's oddly effective. Historians still argue whether Babylonian market math came from temple training or evolved on its own, but the truth is probably both. The scribes formalized it. The merchants made it sharp. Your eyes catch on a tablet balanced on the knee of a quiet man sitting in the corner. Unlike the noisy stall keepers, he's not selling anything. He's solving something. He sketches a triangle, numbers the sides, and adds a little star in the margin. You scoot closer. This triangle, it looks familiar. Very familiar. A right triangle, a squared plus b squared equals... Wait a second. Pythagoras, you murmur. The man looks at you with the kind of blank expression ancient people always give time travelers. But here's the thing. That triangle, that theorem, it's on a Babylonian tablet called Plimpton, 322, dated more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras was even a twinkle in Greece's philosophical eye. Yes, you're watching someone use the Pythagorean theorem long before it was called that. And what's more delightful, they're using it not to build temples, but to divide farmland. You glance at the notes beside the triangle. Field A, field B, diagonal for canal. That's right, high-level geometry used to irrigate chickpeas. There's something very human about this. Some kid back then was like, I need a right angle so the water doesn't flood my neighbor's turnips. And instead of guessing, they built the first known trigonometry table. Of course, they didn't call it trigonometry. They just called it farming. You lean back, mind pleasantly foggy with numbers and dust, and smile. It's almost comforting. Math in this world is rarely abstract. It's in shadows and shovels, not whiteboards and test scores. You wander onward and stumble upon an open classroom, not like a modern one, but more of a shaded grove with matte slates and a smell of sweat and dried dates. The teacher is drilling his students on reciprocals. That's right, dividing Babylon style. Here's a quirky twist: they didn't divide the way you do. Instead of dividing 1 by 3, they found the reciprocal of 3 1/3 and multiplied by that. You watch as a kid stabs at the tablet with dramatic flair. 6 times 1/3 is 2, he declares. Not quite correct, but bold. The teacher sighs and reaches for a palm switch. You flinch, but it's just for tapping the mat, lightly. Try again, he says, use the table. And there it is again, memorized math tables, sacred scrolls of reciprocals and squares burned into their brains like favorite lullabies. You try your hand, you press a wedge for one another for 2, you attempt 1, 7, and yeah, it's still annoying. The result starts repeating, but their notation doesn't allow for an endless decimal. The math teacher shrugs. Just around it, he says, like generations of students after him. You imagine a Babylonian kid going home to their parents, I hate 7s. I'm going to be a potter. Same energy, different millennia. A sudden shout breaks your focus. At a nearby stall, a dispute has broken out. Not over money, but over measurement. One man insists his jug holds 3 quarts. The other says it's 2.5. A scale is produced, water is poured. A crowd gathers like it's the Super Bowl of ratios. You watch heart pounding with oddly intense math-based suspense. Finally, the jug is proven to hold 2.6 Babylonian units. The accuser nods smugly. The vendor groans. A child in the crowd mutters, should have used a base 60 calibration stick. Honestly, same. But that's Babylon. Numbers are never just numbers. They are power, persuasion, and occasionally public humiliation. As you wander back toward the temple shade, something clicks. In this world, math isn't a subject, it's a language. One spoken by priests and merchants alike. One that can map stars, settle debts, or cheat you out of 3 extra onions if you're not paying attention. And for a civilization without calculators, clocks, or even a proper zero, they're doing a dangerously impressive job. You drift now through narrower alleys where the morning's heat climbs like a slow exhale from the bricks. Every corner of Babylon seems to breathe math, but here in the Temple District, it's more like a chant, a rhythm. You turn a corner and find yourself face to face with a carved relief of the moon god Sin, a serene bearded figure cradling what looks suspiciously like a stylized abacus. Okay, maybe it's just a crescent moon. But in Babylon, you can never be too sure. A scribe is seated nearby, his fingers smudged with clay, whispering formulas beneath his breath as he etches rows of numbers onto a tablet. His tablet bears not just numbers, but tiny cuneiform symbols for phases of the moon, names of constellations, and markers of festivals. You sit quietly nearby and realize what's happening. He's calculating the next lunar eclipse. Math here doesn't just predict rainfall or barley bushels. It predicts omens. It consults the gods. It peeks behind the curtain of the universe and says, yeah, that shadow on the moon next Tuesday, totally expected. You lean closer. His numbers aren't just decimal, they're sexagesimal base 60. Fractions like 1/2, 1/3, 1/5 fit beautifully. Others like 1/7 make him groan audibly. You share a look. He shrugs. The gods like round numbers, he mutters. But here's the quirky bit. Babylonian math wasn't just a tool, it was divine performance. The moon god Sin ruled over cycles, tides, fertility, and measured time. To understand math was in a way to speak the language of Sin. That's not a small thing. It's like being given a backstage pass to the cosmos. And it wasn't only the moon. The entire pantheon of gods had jobs that lined up strangely well with mathematical roles. Shamash, god of justice, presided over contracts and weights. Ishtar dealt in cycles of Venus and emotional chaos. Marduk, he was basically the head of celestial HR. Historians still argue whether these divine overlaps were deliberate symbolic systems or happy cosmological accidents. But as you sit here, the sun edging toward its noon peak, you start to feel the spiritual hum beneath the numbers. A young priest appears beside the scribe. He's holding a woven pouch containing 5 silver rings, a copper scale, and a small clay token marked with wedges. He lays them on the ground like offerings. What's he calculating? You whisper. Bride price, the scribe replies, not looking up. She was born on a day when Venus vanished and the moon was at half shadow. That makes her both lucky and unpredictable. You blink. Astrology and economics in one equation. Welcome to Babylonian romance. The scribe continues, muttering 5 silver for the stars, 2 more for her mother's dowry, 1 if she's left-handed. He shrugs. Left-handed girls are complicated. You chuckle. The priest does not. But here's the thing, they believed this mattered. These weren't silly superstitions tacked onto math. In their world, math was superstition. It gave structure to mystery. It whispered that the gods had patterns, that chaos, if charted correctly, could be negotiated. You sit a while longer and begin to notice something deeper, the rhythm of the numbers. The slow pulsing way calculations are spoken aloud. Each equation a ritual, each solution a kind of prayer. And it's not just priests. Down the street, a merchant mutters an incantation as he checks a delivery. 6 jars of oil, 5 measures of flour, 1 shekel for the cart, 2 for the guard, and 3 for sin's shadow if the moon appears crooked tonight. The buyer nods solemnly. Deal done. To your modern mind, it's easy to separate math from meaning. But here you can't. You shouldn't. The math has a heartbeat, a whisper, an aftertaste of incense. The ziggurat looms in the distance, each level marked with symbolic numbers. You recall the priest from earlier dividing the sky into 360 slices. Why 360? Because it fit the heavens. Because it divided well. Because it felt right. You wonder, were they reverse engineering the cosmos? Did they see the stars and build math around them, or build math and see the stars conform? The answer, maddeningly, might be both. A voice breaks your reverie. Would you like to make your own chart? You turn to find a girl no older than 12 holding a fresh clay slab and a spare stylus. She's a student but already confident enough to teach. She places the tablet in your lap and grins. Draw a square, then divide it. 4 rows, 4 columns, fill in the center, start with the number of days since the last full moon. You obey clumsily, scratching in wedges. She nods, then tilts her head. Now multiply each corner by the number of stars you saw last night. You try to remember, you round up. Math allows that here. As you calculate, she leans in and whispers, "The gods don't care if it's perfect. They care if it's sincere." Your hands move more easily after that. You add symbols for your own name. A little swirl for protection. A diagonal slash for luck. Is it math? Is it spell work? Does it matter? The tablet dries as you hold it, the surface hardening beneath your fingertips like memories solidifying into history. And in that moment, you understand what the Babylonians knew thousands of years before you numbers aren't cold. They glow with meaning, with myth, with the moonlight of gods who count in silence. The shadows stretch longer now, and Babylon begins its slow pivot from sun to stars. You stroll beside a canal, its waters sluggish and opaque, mirroring the rooftops in a sleepy blur. A barge creaks in the distance. Somewhere, someone's arguing about lentils. But your focus shifts as you spot something remarkable. A group of students huddled around a tablet that doesn't just feature math, it features a triangle. Not just any triangle, a right triangle, with crisp, intentional proportions. The excitement is palpable even if nobody's cheering. Babylonians weren't the cheering type, too dusty. You ease closer and squint. The tablet looks familiar, too familiar. You blink. Oh no, it's Plimpton 322. If this were a movie, the dramatic music would cue right about now. This small clay rectangle, discovered thousands of years later in a dusty storeroom, would go on to baffle and delight scholars across the globe. And here you are staring at it as it's being written for the first time. Each row on the tablet lists 3 numbers, 1 for the length of a side, 1 for the other side, and 1 for the hypotenuse. And here's the twist, they're not using decimals. They're working in base 60, and the numbers are big. Some of them go into the thousands. You watch one boy scratch in a column labeled short side, another labeled long side, and finally diagonal. All in those tiny cuneiform wedges that make modern math look like a bedtime story. Which, to be fair, this is. A teacher hovers over them like a hawk in linen robes. "Check your proportions," he mutters, tapping a stylus on the table. "The gods hate sloppiness." One student mutters, "The gods hate math." Another snorts. You silently agree. But what's happening here is revolutionary. These kids aren't just doing arithmetic, they're manipulating relationships between numbers. It's not 3 times 4 is 12. It's if one side is this, then the other must be that, and the diagonal becomes this. That's algebra, with attitude. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians understood what we'd now call the Pythagorean theorem, or if they just stumbled on it while noodling around with triangle problems. But the data, the formulas, the ratios, they speak for themselves. And guess what? Their list doesn't include every right triangle, only the pretty ones, the ones with whole number sides and elegant proportions. It's math with aesthetic standards. You love to see it. You peek over one student's shoulder as she puzzles through a triangle where the sides are 119, 120, and 169 units long. Not very bedtime friendly, unless your dreams involve protractors. But she's beaming. "Perfect triple," she whispers. You whisper back, "Pythagorean triple." She tilts her head. "Pytha who?" "Never mind." You smile and let her take the credit. Nearby, a senior scribe shows off another triangle-based technique calculating land boundaries. In a world without Google Maps or GPS, How do you prove your field ends where your neighbor's begins? You measure it. Right angles, equal sides, diagonal checks. If you mess up, lawsuits, clay-based ones. You follow the scribe to a field outside the walls where ropes are stretched between sticks, like some kind of Bronze Age geometry club. A farmer waves him over. The canal split, he says, and now the corner of my field floods. The scribe nods, squints at the rope grid, and begins sketching a triangle in the dirt. He's using something called the 3-4-5 method. A triangle with sides in the ratio 3-4-5 always gives you a perfect 90-degree angle. It's the Pythagorean theorem's party trick, and Babylonians used it 1,000 years before Pythagoras threw his first toga party. Within minutes, the field is adjusted. The farmer smiles. The scribe walks off stylus, tucked behind his ear like a low-key superhero. You pause and think what other triangles have hidden in the background of history. Roof lines, sails, ziggurat steps. All balanced by numbers, angles, intuition. All brought into order by quiet scribes with tired hands and very sharp reeds. But it wasn't just about farming and construction. Right triangles had cosmic implications. In the temple archives, priests used them to predict lunar eclipses. The movement of celestial bodies was often charted using geometric relationships, distance, angle, shadow length. The math wasn't just helpful, it was sacred. You picture a young priest pacing beneath the stars, stylus in hand, trying to triangulate the moon's shadow during an eclipse. No telescopes, just raw numbers and burning faith. That's not math class, that's mythic trigonometry. The more you think about it, the more it makes sense that Babylonian math blended science and spirituality. Their world wasn't divided between logic and belief. Their logic was belief. One final detail strikes you as odd. Many of their triangle problems aren't explained. They're written out as cold, hard numbers, no fluff. No Timmy walks from point A to B, just columns and figures. Some scholars think these were reference lists. Others think they were training exercises. A few suspect they were part of a secret scribe exam, a standardized math test from 1800 BCE. Now that's haunting. As the stars peek out and the last light fades from the sky, you realize something profound. The Babylonians weren't just early mathematicians. They were architects of trust in the invisible, the predictable, the measurable. And here you are thousands of years later, still using their angles to build furniture, measure screens, and install your Wi-Fi router straight. You lie back on the warm earth, letting the whispers of triangles and temple teachers swirl around you like a lullaby sung in wedges. The next morning arrives softly, gold light pooling over rooftops, a soft chorus of reed flutes wafting through the narrow lanes, and the low murmur of commerce already beginning to churn like a sleepy tide. You stretch or rub your eyes and find yourself wandering once again into the practical heartbeat of Babylonian math. Today it smells like grain. Lots of grain. You're in the market district now, where giant baskets of barley tower beside sacks of lentils and amphorae of oil. And near one shaded stall, two scribes crouch over a clay tablet and a pile of barley kernels, which you're now convinced may be the oldest Excel spreadsheet in existence. This is where Babylonian math gets cozy grain, beer, and geometry. 6 quarts of barley per worker per day, one mutters. Multiplied by 30 days for 10 workers, how much barley do I need for the month? You squint. 6x 30 equals 180. Multiply by 10, 1/800 quarts. That's a lot of soup. But the scribe doesn't calculate like you. He consults a pre-written multiplication table, his fingers gliding across rows of neat cuneiform wedges. No long multiplication, no scratch paper. Just memory, rhythm, and clay. You notice another set of calculations scratched on a nearby board, this one about land division. Apparently 2 brothers inherited a field. One gets 2/3, the other gets 1/3. But they have to split the water channel running through it equally. You sigh, math and family, a timeless drama. As the scribes debate how to run a canal diagonally across unequal land parcels, you realize you're watching a live-action geometry puzzle. They draw rectangles with sticks, then cut triangles into the corners to measure runoff areas. One of them mutters something about the square of the diagonal and starts scrawling in triangles. Yep, more right angles. Babylonian math wasn't just calculations, it was landscaping with logic. Historians still argue whether most Babylonians understood these geometric principles, or if only the elite scribes mastered them. Either way, the outcome mattered. If you miscalculated your barley field, your taxes would be wrong. And if your taxes were wrong, a tax collector might show up with a tablet or a guard. You wander past a set of government offices where a man is auditing what seems to be beer rations for workers. I gave them 4 quarts of beer per day, he says. Now I have 900 workers for 5 days. How much beer do I need? You do the math in your head. 4x5 equals 20 times 900, 18,000 quarts. That's either a party or a public works project. But the scribe nods, double-checks his beer table, and stamps a clay tablet with the official seal. This isn't a bar tab, it's infrastructure. You smile. Babylon is a civilization lubricated by beer and sustained by proportional thinking. Elsewhere in the district, a caravan leader unrolls a leather map and starts arguing with a grain dealer about the measurement of sacks versus jars. You peek over the edge of the stall to find yet another scribe pulling out a small scale and a handful of standardized weights shaped like ducks, lions, and cubes. Quirky, yes, but functional. Each weight corresponds to a shekel or a mina or even half a talent. Measurement was symbolic and practical, like if your calculator also looked like a zoo animal. A curious child at the next stall asks the grain seller, "Why can't we just use round numbers?" The woman raises an eyebrow. "Because real life is never round," she replies, "only figs are round." You make a mental note of that. Could be a metaphor, could also be lunch. Further down the path, you enter what seems to be an open-air granary. Here, geometry moves beyond math into architecture. Large silos dominate the space, cylindrical domed, beautifully symmetrical, and every inch of them was built using math. A builder calls over to a young apprentice. "How many bricks will we need to raise the height by 3 cubits? The boy doesn't flinch. He sketches a cylinder in the dust, estimates the surface area, and mutters a quick calculation involving volume, brick density, and space for ventilation. You don't understand half of it, but the builder nods and claps his back. It hits you standing among the shadows of grain towers and barley records. Babylonian math was rooted in survival. It fed people, paid wages, directed water. It wasn't abstract. It was breakfast, politics, and plumbing all rolled into one. A sudden breeze stirs loose clay dust into the air. You squint through it and catch a final surreal image. An elderly woman measuring out flour using a cup marked with tiny wedge-shaped notches, each one a precise volume indicator. You watch her level off the top, pat the flour into a perfect mound, and hand it over with a smile. There she says, "Fair is fair." And in that moment you realize that's the heartbeat of Babylonian math, not perfection, not proof, but fairness. Every wedge carved in clay, every angle measured in rope, every grain weighed against a line-shaped token, it all pointed to balance. To understanding the world just enough to live in it well. And maybe, just maybe, to go to bed knowing your barley won't flood your figs, won't get shorted, and your neighbor's goats won't eat your geometry experiment. Night arrives softly over Babylon once more, this time wrapping the city in a velvet hush rather than a roar. The temperature drops a degree or two. You can hear the distant splash of someone washing vegetables in a courtyard, the pluck of a stringed instrument near the ziggurat, and chanting. You follow the sound like a moth to firelight. In a stone-walled garden behind hanging vines and stone benches, you find a group of priest astronomers seated in a crescent chanting the names of stars. You're about to stumble away wrong, meeting clearly, when a young priest gestures you in. "Sit," he says, "we're reading the heavens." And they are. Above you the stars blaze, not twinkle blaze in ways your city-lit eyes have long forgotten. One priest traces a pattern across the sky using a stick like a wand. There, he whispers, is Venus. She has returned. You squint, nothing moves. But then someone hands you a tablet, fresh clay warm from the fire. It's covered in tiny grid marks and labeled points. A sky chart. They're not just looking at the stars. They're mapping them with math as the ink. You sit stunned as one of the older priests begins an explanation. Every star rises in a pattern, he says. If we know the pattern, we know the year's rhythm. When to plant, when to travel, when to marry. The others nod. One mutters something about Venus and war. Another references the moon god's sin. All of it is written, calculated, believed. This is where Babylonian math collides with mystery, where science and spirituality dance an intricate wedge-shaped waltz. A younger priest pulls out a stone pointer and begins charting retrograde motion. The strange path where planets appear to move backward in the sky. He shows you how Venus curves, pauses, reverses, then resumes her course. You lean in, eyebrows raised. That's weird. He grins. Exactly. The gods never move in straight lines. To chart this planetary loop-de-loop, they've devised an elegant set of measurements. Degrees, angles, timing. They track Venus across the zodiac with almost painful precision. Historians still argue whether Babylonian astronomers truly understood planetary motion or just had really good calendars. But sitting here listening to them recite Venus's 584-day cycle like poetry You start to believe they knew more than they let on. And here's the quirky part: they use zigzag functions to approximate planetary speed. Think of it like an ancient line graph approximating gradual shifts with step-like changes. Crude, yes, but brilliantly effective. A priest shows you a table with speeds. Here she slows, he says, tapping the wedge. Then she stops, then reverses. And there it is, motion captured in math long before Newton or Galileo. No telescopes, no orbits, just keen eyes, endless patience and clay. Another priest flips a second tablet toward you. It contains the infamous Venus tablet of Amisaduca, which records the planets rising and setting over a 21-year cycle. You whistle softly. That's commitment. You don't watch the sky for a night, one of them says, you watch it for a lifetime. That line sticks with you. Someone behind you grumbles he's trying to predict a lunar eclipse, but his table seems off. There's a discrepancy, he mutters. The moon should have been darker. It wasn't. A hush falls. One priest makes the sign of sin across his chest. Another quietly starts recalculating. You realize in that moment math wasn't infallible to them. It was interpretive, flexible, even mystical. The stars might not behave, but that didn't mean the math was wrong. It meant the gods were talking in riddles. And so they recalculated, night after night, not to conquer the cosmos, but to stay in rhythm with it. Suddenly there's laughter. A young priest misread his tablet and predicted 2 moons instead of 1. That would be dramatic, someone jokes. Imagine the tax calculations. You laugh too. For a moment, the stars feel close, personal. Then one priest begins to sing. Not loudly, just a low, steady chant repeating the names of constellations and their associated omens. You realize the song is a mnemonic, a way to remember complicated data before paper, before books. Each verse a line of a sky chart. Each note a wedge on a tablet. You hum along. And as the night deepens, you're handed your own clay tablet blank except for a single etched star. You're told to watch that point in the sky, chart its rise and fall, predict its delay. No pressure. You press your stylus to the clay and begin to copy what you see. Slowly, carefully, one wedge at a time. You're not calculating, you're listening. Because that's what the Babylonians did best. They didn't just measure the sky, they let the sky teach them. They took math not as conquest, but as conversation, a way to keep the peace between heaven and earth. And in that soft, star-silvered courtyard, the only thing louder than the numbers is the silence between them. You wake to the sound of sandals slapping against stone and a boy's panicked voice crying, "He's coming! He's coming!" You sit up disoriented, clay still stuck under your fingernails from last night's planetary scribbling. For a moment you wonder if Venus has declared war, but no, it's much more terrifying. It's tablet inspection day. The teacher is coming. You hurry after the crowd and slip into a low-ceiling building that smells strongly of oil lamps and mild dread. Inside, students are lined up cross-legged in rows, each one holding a clay tablet like it's made of glass. You join them, clutching your own sorry slab with the single star you tracked. The instructor enters. He's not tall, but he doesn't need to be. He carries himself like someone who once yelled at a king for forgetting a reciprocal. His robe is frayed, his beard is sharp, and his eyes sweep the room like a hawk searching for improper wedge marks. Welcome to Babylonian school, and no, they don't hand out gold stars. They hand out detentions made of clay. He starts down the row, inspecting tablets. Sloppy cuneiform, he mutters. Wrong base, too few decimal conversions. What is this, a love poem? You hold your breath as he gets closer. The student beside you is reciting a multiplication table in a trembling voice. 6 times 10 is 60. 6 times 11 is, the teacher sighs. Ziggurats are built on steadier foundations than that. Historians still argue whether Babylonian schools were primarily for future scribes, priests, or administrators. But one thing's clear, they were rigorous. The curriculum was stuffed with math, law, writing, astronomy, and enough memorization to make a modern spelling bee look like a picnic. You sneak a glance at the wall where copies of famous tablets are displayed. One shows a field with a triangular canal cut through it, annotated with area calculations and a helpful note. Don't build too close to the edge. That's not math, that's life advice. The teacher reaches you. You hand over your tablet with the nervous reverence of a first-time skywatcher. He squints, reads the wedges, and raises an eyebrow. You watched the wrong star, he says flatly. That one hasn't moved in 3 nights. You panic. I thought it was special. He stares at you. Then with the faintest smirk, so did the Assyrians. That's why they lost the war. Did he just make a joke? He hands back your tablet and moves on, leaving behind equal parts confusion relief and a weird desire to study harder. Nearby, two students compare notes on a math problem involving inheritance division. One recites a man has 3 sons. He leaves 2/3 of his land to the first half of what remains to the second, and the rest to the third. How much land does each receive? You blink. That's kind of evil. They sketch out rectangles in the dust, arguing about units and proportional logic. You can't give 2/3 of something and then half of the rest, one complains. The other shrugs. He's dead. He can do what he wants. Even math problems here carry the whisper of drama. Across the room, an older student presents a clay tablet inscribed with a word problem involving brick production. It's specific, shockingly so. If one worker makes 40 bricks a day and another makes 36, how long will it take to make 12,000 bricks if they work together? You do the math in your head, 76 bricks a day, divided into 12,000. But the student is already reciting the answer with the poise of someone who's built enough hypothetical ziggurats to earn a free robe. You realize something important as the lesson continues. These students aren't just learning how to calculate. They're learning when to calculate, what to measure, what to ignore, how to estimate without upsetting the gods, the tax man, or your cousin who still insists he owns half the grain shed. The teacher scribbles a final equation on the practice tablet. It's messy, but it works. Sometimes the math will be ugly, he says, but if the result is fair, the gods will accept it. You look around and see a class of kids, dusty, tired, clever, grappling with algebra before algebra even had a name. You see math not as perfection, but as an argument with the world. A way to say, this is confusing. Let's make it less so. Before you leave, one of the students presses a small tablet into your hand. It's cracked at the corner and slightly smudged, but readable. You recognize the numbers. It's the barley and beer problem from earlier, neatly solved and preserved. For practice, she says, smiling. You nod, and for a brief moment, you don't just understand Babylonian math. You feel it. The weight of the clay, the patience of the stylus, the pressure of knowing your answers might feed someone or cost them their goats. You step back into the light, squinting as the sun flares over the rooftops. A new day, a new set of numbers. And the quiet confidence that even 4,000 years ago, homework was still kind of brutal. Afternoon presses down on Babylon like a heavy quilt. The sun has reached its peak, and the streets shimmer with heat. You find refuge in the shadow of a temple wall, where the air is cooler and smells faintly of baked clay and bitter herbs. But even here, there's no escape. Someone is groaning. You turn the corner and find a small group of students, scribes in training, gathered around a tablet looking utterly miserable. One of them has his head in his hands. Another mutters curses that would probably get him smacked with a stylus if a teacher were nearby. You approach carefully. What's the problem? They point to the tablet, division by 7 again. You flinch, because yes, even in ancient Babylon, division by 7 was a nightmare. You sit beside them and take a look. The problem is simple in theory. Divide 1 by 7. Okay, now try doing that in base 60 without a calculator and with a notation system that doesn't support repeating decimals. You start scratching the math out in your head. 1/7 of 60, that's 8.571428. Wait, the 0.571428 part, that never ends cleanly. Even your tired modern brain knows it. The decimal repeats forever. But Babylonian scribes, they couldn't repeat forever. They had limits both in space and patience. So they did what humans always do. When numbers get messy, they fudged it. The tablet shows an approximation: 1 divided 7 equals 0, 834, 17, 834, 17. That's not a typo. That's them repeating a pattern manually because they didn't have a symbol for repeating like your lazy modern or bar notation. Every time they needed to divide by 7, they had to make a decision: how close is close enough? Historians still argue whether this was a flaw in the system or just a clever workaround. But from the look on these students' faces, it feels like a punishment from the gods. One boy sighs. Why do we even need to divide by 7, he asks. A girl responds without looking up, because someone thought 60 was a good idea. You grin. Now they're catching on to sarcasm. Despite the frustration, there's beauty in the effort. They're carving numbers into tablets using brute force patience, knowing full well the results won't be perfect. They're building trust in approximations. In close enough. And close enough feeds people. A passing teacher overhears the complaint and chuckles. Let me tell you about fractions, he says, lowering himself beside the group. They used to be worse. You blink. Worse. He pulls out an older tablet and lays it gently on the stones. Back in the early days, he says, we didn't use reciprocals. We just listed what part of something we were talking about, 1/3, 1/2, 1/5. But then we needed to divide more things. Split debts, split rations, split, well, fingers if you weren't careful. He traces the familiar base 60 grid with his stylus. So we use tables of reciprocals. Instead of dividing, we multiplied by the inverse. The students nod. You nod. You've seen this before. It's clever, elegant even. But it only works if the number has a clean reciprocal in base 60. And 7. 7 does not play nice. You all take a collective moment of silence for the tortured math behind splitting a goat 7 ways. The teacher continues. One day maybe we'll have better tools, symbols that show repetition, machines that calculate without clay. But until then, he shrugs. You approximate. There's something comforting about that. In a world obsessed with exactness, Babylonian math quietly whispered, try your best, then round off and move on. You rise and wander off, tablet in hand, still thinking about 7, about how one small number could cause so much trouble, about how many calculations in the ancient world ended not with an exact number, but a best guess and a side eye to the sky just in case the gods were watching. At a nearby stall, a trader is weighing dates and counting coins. You overhear him say 2/7 of a mina for that batch. You freeze. How are you calculating 2/7, you ask? He shrugs. Easier than 1/7. Fair. You watch as he carefully carves the total into a receipt tablet. It's not precise. It's close. But the buyer nods. The seller nods. Deal done. No drama. Just trust and experience. That's what Babylonian math is built on, you realize. Not just knowledge, but negotiation. A constant conversation between certainty and compromise. As you leave, you pass a temple notice board where scribes have posted a table of problematic fractions. 7 is there. So is 13. A few scribes have added extra notes in the margins. Best to avoid using these in tax estimates. If you must divide by 7, double-check your math or run. The moon god smiles on round numbers. You smile too. Because buried under all this serious calculation, under all the angled wedges and dried tablets, lies a simple truth. Babylonian math was deeply human, messy, creative, resilient. And even now, thousands of years later, division by 7 still kind of sucks. There's a certain smell that follows you now as you walk through Babylon, a mix of old clay dust pressed dates and something else, fear of audit. Because today you're heading into a part of the city few dream of visiting, and no one leaves with their numbers intact. You pass a somber gate guarded not by soldiers, but by stone lions and stern-eyed scribes. Welcome to tax collection. You step into a wide courtyard where farmers line up with clay tablets, baskets of grain, and expressions of barely concealed dread. At a shaded desk in the middle of it all sits a man with the spiritual energy of a calculator that judges you. The Babylonian tax assessor. He isn't angry, he's just very, very efficient. You watch as one farmer approaches and sets down a clay receipt. 60 measures of barley, the farmer says. The assessor doesn't even blink. The king's share is 1/3. Did you deduct irrigation costs? Labor, was this under the canal tax zone or outside the boundary? The farmer gulps. This isn't just taxes, it's math under pressure. You peek at the tablet being used. It's not just numbers, it's a story. Babylonian receipts and ledgers were like little episodes of accounting drama. This farmer brought 60 measures, delivered 20, delayed the rest due to oxen fatigue, paid 10 shekels in compensation, still owes 3. You blink. That's debt math, contract law, and cattle health statistics all in one breath. Historians still argue whether these assessments were strictly fair or whether scribes padded the king's share to meet quotas. But you can see the detail here. These folks count everything, not just the what, but the why. You move closer as a merchant lays down a different kind of tablet. This one includes conversion rates. 5 shekels of silver or 40 shekels of barley, he says. The weight is equal, the value negotiable. The assessor snorts. The silver's been shaved. Look, he pulls out a balance scale, places tiny weights shaped like ducks on one side and the silver on the other. The silver dips fast, too fast. Cheating, you whisper. No, the merchant says, sheepish, just hopeful. The assessor scribbles a note and moves on. It's a dance, really, a very dusty, extremely numerical dance. You see people paying taxes in grain, oil, livestock, and labor, and every one of those must be converted into equivalent value using Babylonian math. A young assistant is nearby, flipping through rate tablets, conversion charts that list everything from goat to barley to bricklaying hours to silver weight. These tablets are not just practical. They're weapons-grade spreadsheets hand-carved. You sit beside the assistant and peek at one. It reads, 1 mina of silver equals sign 60 shekels. 1 shekel equals sign weight of 180 grains of barley. 1 ox equals sign 10 shekels of healthy. 1 field hand equals sign 1 quart of beer day. You blink. That last one, not bad compensation. Nearby, a palace steward is calculating rations for a construction crew. I have 120 men, he says. 3 weeks of labor. They need daily grain beer and 1 rest day every 6. You try to work it out. 120 men, 6 days week, x 3 weeks equals sign 2 160 man days. Each man gets 6 quarts of grain damping. Multiply that over 12,000 quarts of grain. The steward doesn't flinch. He uses a grain quota tablet, taps in the total, then adds a small note extra for overseers. You wonder what the overseers actually do. Probably invent ways to make the rest of the crew nervous. And yes, the math gets even messier. A canal burst recently, flooding a barley field. The farmer claims force of nature. The scribe counters negligence in levee repair. They consult a tablet of canal maintenance laws, complete with fine tables and irrigation ratios. You lean in. There's even a line for divine flooding acts of the gods. It has its own tax clause. Pay 1/3 rate if temple confirms divine cause. You can't tell if that's reassuring or deeply concerning. The quirkiest thing, you discover Babylonian late fees. If someone didn't deliver taxes on time, the scribes would mark the owed quantity with a wedge-shaped arrow pointing right, meaning still owed. Sometimes these debts stayed on record for years passed from parent to child. Debts had heirs. You glance at a nearby wall where old tablets are stored. They're labeled by year, ruler, and season. One reads, Year of the Lion Eclipse, 4th moon. Farmer Hanu still owes 6 goats, 2 measures of sesame oil, and 1 very tired ox. You can't help but laugh. Bureaucracy, it seems, is eternal. But you also feel something deeper. These people weren't just counting things. They were documenting relationships between farmer and king, worker and overseer, citizen and the stars. Every number carved in clay was a piece of the puzzle. Who owes what, when, why, and can we please stop dividing by 7? You step back into the street, head buzzing with conversions, ratios, grain weights, and tax laws. A passing boy bumps into you and drops a tiny receipt tablet. You pick it up. It simply says, debt cleared, paid in full. You smile, because in Babylon, that's not just math, that's poetry. You wander through the cooling streets of Babylon. Now the sun slipping behind ziggurats and casting long, syrupy shadows across the walls. The clamor of the market softens. The air smells of sesame oil and drying reeds. A breeze picks up, thank the gods, and carries with it the sound of styluses tapping against clay. Somewhere nearby, a new tablet is being made. But this one is special. You follow the sound to a small scribal workshop tucked between a perfumery and a modest shrine to Nabu, the god of wisdom and writing. Inside, a boy is hunched over his slab of clay, carving rows and rows of neat, even numbers with care and focus that makes your own high school math grades feel personally insulted. You peer closer and realize something strange. He's carving nothing. Well, not actual nothing. He's carving space. In between 2 clusters of cuneiform digits, there's a gap, a deliberate measured absence. The scribe isn't being lazy. He's marking a value that isn't there. You've just stumbled upon one of Babylon's most elusive ideas, almost zero. Yes, that's right. These ancient number wizards got eerily close to inventing zero, but never quite gave it full citizenship. Historians still argue whether this placeholder was meant to represent nothing or just something missing. But either way, it worked. When writing big base 60 numbers, a gap or a special wedge would stand in for the absence of a digit, preventing confusion, like mixing up 1011 minute, 1 second, and 100011 hour, no minutes, 1 second. The trick? It wasn't at the end of a number. Babylonians used placeholder gaps only in the middle. The idea of ending a number with 0 that came much, much later. You imagine a Babylonian scribe reaching the end of a long calculation and thinking, this should be easier to read, but then deciding if future civilizations can handle it. Thanks, buddy. You watch the boy finish his carving and pass the tablet to an older scribe. The elder squints. You left a double wedge here, he says. The boy nods to show that place is empty. The elder grunts. Good. That way the king doesn't think he owns a second canal when he doesn't even have one. Quirky, yes, but practical. Because in a world without zero, placeholder notation was a survival tool. It kept grain counts honest, it kept star charts accurate, it kept priests from building temples twice the size they could afford. Nearby, you notice a shelf full of tablets used for teaching this concept. They contain the same problem written multiple ways. One version without a placeholder, one with a subtle gap, one with the double wedge symbol. You see the evolution right there, nothing becoming something, or rather something becoming a symbol for nothing, which is, let's face it, extremely cool. One tablet is particularly bold. It uses the placeholder wedge not once, but twice in a single number. You stare at it like it's a fossilized dinosaur in a math museum. That's as close as Babylon ever got to inventing zero as a number. A true elegant zero wouldn't show up until the Indian mathematicians gave it shape centuries later, but this is the whisper of that idea. The boy scribes another line, this time a date. Year of the eclipse, third moon. Then he pauses. Wait, how do I write no moons appeared? The older scribe shrugs. You don't, you just leave it blank. You nod slowly, because in Babylonian math, silence had meaning. It makes you think. We treat zero today like it's a given, a foundational part of everything from binary code to bank accounts. But here it's a gentle fiction, a placeholder, a soft-spoken absence that says, hey, there's supposed to be something here, but let's just not. You wonder what life would feel like if we all treated emptiness with that kind of grace. As the evening deepens, more scribes enter the workshop. They begin transcribing inventory lists, astronomical tables, legal calculations, all using that strange little space when needed. No fanfare, no philosophical debates, just practical silence. You glance around and notice something else the workshop doesn't echo. The walls are packed with shelves of dried clay tablets. The sound is absorbed, muffled. You realize that Babylonian knowledge lives quietly. No parchment scrolls, no fan fiction of the gods. Just wedges, lines, and the spaces in between. You pick up a blank tablet and press your stylus into the clay, mimicking the boy's placement of numbers. You leave a space, then another. It's oddly satisfying. You can feel the rhythm of ancient thought. Value, nothing, value again. And that nothing, it holds its own. When you hand the tablet to the older scribe, he scans it quickly and nods. You could have been one of us, he says. You smile, but part of you wants to ask, could I have invented zero for real? You don't. You know the answer. Because zero wasn't about logic, not yet. It was about need. Babylon didn't need to count nothing. They only needed to mark where something wasn't to preserve the flow of meaning. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. The morning dawns not with birdsong, but with counting. You pass under a vine-draped archway and into a square alive with numbers, not written yet, but spoken aloud. Everywhere you look, Babylonians are counting. Not like school children, but like people who know everything depends on it. You pass a weaver measuring dyed thread with outstretched arms and muttering 60 lengths for a full robe, 15 per sleeve. A cook leans over her steaming pot and whispers 7 guests, 1 handful of lentils each, but the priest gets 2. You grin. Even portion control here has religious overtones. And in the center of it all, you see what looks like an empire being inventoried. You follow the rows of stone benches to a long pavilion shaded with palm leaf mats. Scribes sit in pairs cross-legged, each with an assistant who reads aloud, while the other scribes wedge-shaped marks into tablets as quickly as human fingers allow. One assistant announces, Canal 3, branch 114 workers, 2 oxen, 1 broken wheel. Output 24 baskets of reeds. The scribe grunts and records it without blinking. Another voice calls granary 713,000 measures of barley received. 8,200 distributed, 1,100 spoiled, remaining 3,700. You whistle softly. That's more math than most accountants do before lunch. What you're watching is a hallmark of Babylonian civilization. The obsessive need to measure, track, and record everything. This isn't control for control's sake. It's survival. The Euphrates floods, crops fail, armies eat. If you don't know where your grain is, you might not have a kingdom tomorrow. Historians still argue whether Babylon's state machinery was more centralized efficiency or bureaucratic overkill. But here in the soft buzz of counting voices, you see clarity, not chaos. And you also see something else, beauty. Because these numbers aren't random. They flow like a story, the shape of a harvest, the rise and fall of cattle populations, the rhythm of river levels across the seasons. It's like the whole empire is a body, and this is its pulse. You move along the benches and come across a different kind of scribe, one working not with lists, but with diagrams. His tablet shows a grid overlaying a rough map of the city's northern district. Dots represent houses, lines represent property boundaries, and stylized wedges mark ownership shares. He's calculating land taxes. You watch as he adjusts one wedge, shakes his head, and redraws a boundary. This neighbor claimed too much, he mutters. If I leave it, the temple won't receive full tithe. Yes, even God's cut depends on clean math. Beside him, another scribe works on labor rosters. His tablet lists workers' days, worked rest days, days owed, and rations given. You realize quickly that this is proto-payroll. And what's more impressive, they're not just listing names, they're solving problems. One entry reads, worker AKIL absent 3 days sick, reduced ration by half, return full on priest note. You raise your eyebrows. That's HR policy 1800 BCE style. A runner enters the pavilion and delivers a dispatch, a message from a distant outpost. Bandits disrupted barley shipment. Only 8 out of 10 carts arrived. Immediately, scribes start recalculating totals for 5 different storage sites, adjusting rations, redirecting oxen, and updating the monthly distribution plan. All in real time, with clay. You'd say it's like Google Sheets, but honestly, Google Sheets could learn a thing or two. You notice now that many of these tablets are organized by season and year, usually referencing events, the year of the Red River or the year Nabu spoke. Not numbers, but memories. Each set of data tied to a moment in the story of the land. It makes you think every one of these tablets is a sentence in a novel written in math. And in that novel, nothing escapes measurement. Canals, brick production, temple expenditures, number of sheep sacrificed during festivals. Even the number of tears shed during mourning rituals, a poetic exaggeration maybe, but still listed. The more you watch, the more you realize something wild. The Babylonians measured everything, but not to control people, to understand them, to predict what might happen next, to balance what was owed, to remember. Even failure was recorded. One tablet nearby reads, flood broke levee, 20% crop loss, compensation awarded, temple spared. You don't know who wrote that, but you know they were trying to make sense of disaster with digits. They were trying to write fairness into the flood. And that's the part that lingers as you leave the pavilion. It's not just that Babylon was numerically brilliant. It's that they gave numbers weight, not as weapons, as witnesses. As you wander back through the alleys, the day's last light warming the upper walls, you hear a child practicing aloud. 60, 120, 180. She stops and frowns. Her older brother corrects her gently. 240. She repeats. And just like that, another beat of the empire's pulse continues on. It's after dark now, and Babylon is quiet but never silent. Somewhere a flute meanders through the alleys. A clay lantern swings gently in a breeze, casting moving light on the wall. And in a small side room of a palace, barely larger than a pantry, you step into a scene that feels secret. Here by lamplight, 2 scribes sit hunched over a set of tablets not meant for market or temple or school. These tablets are different. They're coded. One scribe glances at the door, then resumes carving. The other is whispering something under his breath, numbers paired with strange phrases. 40 for the reeds, 25 for the jackal, 80 if the gate is red. You've wandered into one of Babylon's quieter specialties, mathematics as espionage. Because where there are numbers, there are secrets. You ease closer and scan the tablet in front of them. It looks like a standard delivery record. Barley amounts, oxen loads, shipping times. But one line doesn't make sense. 50 jars delivered before the second moon's silence. 7 withheld for the man with no shadow. You blink. That's not math, that's a code. And it's not just poetic flair. Babylonian scribes often used number substitutions, riddles, and ambiguous phrasing when a tablet wasn't meant for everyone to understand, especially in palace records where information could be more dangerous than any spear. Historians still argue whether Babylon developed true cryptography or if this was just clever masking. But either way, it worked. Some tablets read like puzzles no one today has cracked. You watch as one scribe adds a wedge symbol that doesn't belong. It's slanted differently, subtle, intentional. That means false count, he whispers, a signal for the reader that the totals are doctored. You stare. Did he just say they're forging math? Well, not forging, finessing. You find a stack of tablets nearby, each a kind of false front. One claims 400 shekels of silver in temple donations, but a hidden mark, just a tiny dot off grid, reveals that only 250 actually arrived. The rest diverted, reallocated, possibly pocketed. And here's where things get interesting. The math still checks out. The scribe made sure of it. Even the theft is calculated. One of them says quietly, "If the numbers don't add up, people notice. If they add up too perfectly, people ask questions." The trick is to be almost right. You lean against the wall stunned. Babylonian math wasn't just for the gods and farmers. It was used in power plays, cover-ups, and palace whispers. Even tax rates could be manipulated with clever substitution. You find a tablet labeled Year of Ash Rain. Sounds ominous. It lists labor costs for wall repairs, standard stuff, except that several labor totals repeat. A lot. Same numbers, same workers over and over. You count. There are more workdays recorded than days in a month. Someone padded the schedule. You glance at the signature wedge at the bottom one you now recognize as belonging to a scribe named Naram Sin, who according to a marginal note preferred generous accounting. Generous indeed. In another stack of sensitive tablets you find code names. Pseudonyms for contractors, merchants, even royal officials. The man of reads the eye behind the gate, the one who counts night grain. Every alias has a set of transactions. You realize you're holding the closest thing Babylon had to spy records. And the numbers they were the language of control. But here's the beautiful twist. Math didn't only hide power. Sometimes it protected it. You find one tablet sealed in clay with a palace emblem. Inside is a complex multiplication list, a set of payment records, and a final tally that confirms full balance paid. No debts remain. Stamped, sealed, untouchable. In a world without lawyers, this was the contract. This was the truth that couldn't be edited. A dried, fired tablet, the ancient version of blockchain. You smile, suddenly aware that in Babylon, numbers held both sword and shield. You peek back at the scribes now quietly organizing their tablets by risk level. High-risk ones go into a read box with a false label. Safer ones are stacked by year, tied together with string. One scribe murmurs, "If it ever comes to trial, this is the version we burn." You don't ask what the trial would be about. Instead, you step out into the street again, the wind tugging gently at your robe. The stars are high, the city is sleeping. But under that sleep, the numbers are always working, always whispering. Not all math is for school children. Some of it is for secrets. And some secrets we're still trying to decode. You wake slowly to the sound of quiet rustling, like reeds swaying in soft water. But it's not plants moving. It's styluses pressing into clay. You open your eyes to a strange sight, students seated in rows, not at desks, but on mats, their bodies twisted at odd angles. Their tablets rest on their thighs, but slanted, tilted, slightly left like they're writing while mid-fall. And the writing, it's not horizontal, it's not vertical, it's angled sideways. You shuffle in awkwardly and sit at the edge of the class, curious. A scribe in training glances over and notices your tilted head. "Yes," she says dryly. "It always looks wrong to newcomers." You watch as she returns to her work, pressing wedge after wedge into the clay with a rhythmic, practiced grace. Her tablet slowly fills with cuneiform that marches diagonally across the surface. Welcome to the quirkiest visual oddity of Babylonian math. Why did they write sideways? This wasn't just for fun. This was form-following function. Back in the earliest days of cuneiform, writing was done top to bottom with vertical orientation. But as clay tablets got smaller, and as scribes realized they could hold them in one hand while carving with the other, the method changed. The tablet rotated, and so did the writing. Historians still debate whether this shift was ergonomic aesthetic or just a collective shrug of, "Hey, this works better." But one thing's certain: by the time Babylonian mathematicians were working out equations, their text leaned confidently sideways like it had somewhere to be. You pick up a practice tablet and try for yourself. Hold it in your left hand, press with the stylus in your right. Ah, yes, the slant happens naturally. It's not laziness, it's design. The girl beside you peeks at your attempt and winces. Too deep. Your wedges are drowning. Fair enough. She shows you her own tablet lined with carefully spaced numbers, each wedge angled to catch the light just so. If you do it right, she says you can read it even in the dark. That's no exaggeration. Babylonian scribes wrote with a combination of pressure angle and repetition that made their tablets glow with legibility. Not bad for people who couldn't erase anything. Nearby, a teacher taps on a large demonstration tablet mounted to a stand. He's showing the class how to align multi-column calculations. The eye must flow, he says. No floating digits. The math must feel like walking downhill. You try to imagine modern math classes saying anything remotely that poetic. The teacher flips the tablet around. This side is messier crossouts, overlapping lines, a few angry wedge smashes. First drafts, he mutters. Everyone needs a sand pit. You learn then that many scribes practiced on reusable clay, smoothing it over after each mistake. Only when a solution was final did they move to a firing tablet, the clay that would be baked and preserved for eternity. You take that in, every permanent calculation you've ever seen from ancient Babylon, that was the final draft. No wonder they were so careful. A nearby boy lifts his tablet and proudly shows a neat table of reciprocals numbers laid out like a staircase. Each entry was written on an angle and spaced evenly across rows. You stare at it. It's like a sideways abacus, you murmur. Exactly, he says. And if you're careful, your thumb won't smear the answers while you write. Turns out orientation wasn't just aesthetic. It was practical hand management. And there's another benefit. As one older student demonstrates, rotating the tablet slightly helps you trace diagonal calculations. If you're solving a problem involving triangles area, or slopes that slant matches the visual logic, the student draws a triangle and begins labeling each side. As he does, he arranges his digits along the triangle's angle. It's easier to align data when it follows the shape, he explains. Math wants to lean. Historians still argue whether this sideways system was standardized across all Babylonian schools or just evolved regionally. But the results are remarkably consistent. Scribes all over Mesopotamia spanning centuries wrote math as if they were gliding down a hill. You try one more time, pressing your stylus into the clay. This time you follow the flow. The number 1 sits at the top, then 2, 3, and 4 follow in a gentle diagonal. By 10, the numbers curve slightly, forming a lazy S across the tablet. It's weirdly soothing. You suddenly understand something important. Babylonian math wasn't stiff. It wasn't about rigid grids or lifeless formulas. It moved, it bent, it flowed. The writing mirrored the math. The math mirrored the sky. Even their geometry, calculated across fields and canals, was drawn in slope, not boxes. As the class ends, the teacher collects tablets with practiced ease. One falls cracking slightly. Everyone winces. Backup copy, he says with a shrug. Always make 2. Another quirk of Babylonian math: redundancy. If something mattered, it was recorded twice on 2 tablets, sometimes in 2 different hands. They knew life was fragile, so they protected their numbers. You step outside into the breeze again, clutching your crooked tablet like a sleepy badge of honor. It's not perfect. The angle wobbles. The numbers lean like tipsy fish. But it's yours. And for the first time, you realize that good math doesn't have to be straight. Sometimes it's better sideways. The next time you blink, it's dusk again. Babylon's golden hour, when the walls turn the color of honey and every canal reflects the last heat of the sun. You find yourself walking past the outer district where ivy climbs over sun-worn stones and a strange scent hangs in the air. Wet limestone, crushed mint, and distant jasmine. And then you see them. A row of men in linen tunics standing on a stone terrace. They're silent, staring upward toward the famous structure looming beyond the hanging gardens. Or what's left of them. To be clear, historians still argue whether the hanging gardens truly existed or if they were just poetic exaggerations of terraced farms and irrigation systems. But here tonight they exist, and the math behind them is very real. You follow a narrow path that curves up the terraced levels. Stone platforms stacked like steps to the sky, each one draped in vines, tiny trees and flowers too fragrant for this much desert. You pass through shade and sunlight, shadow and leaf until the air cools. At the second level, a scribe stands beside a large water wheel, slowly turning, as a slave walks within it like a hamster with ambition. Water is drawn upward in a bucket chain, spilling into a clay trough that snakes between planter beds. You realize what you're looking at: hydraulic engineering powered by Babylonian math. A younger worker leans beside the trough, tablet in hand. He's doing calculations, something about volume flow and elevation gain. You glance over his shoulder. It's a list of values: water required per terrace, height of lift time between cycles, total volume delivered per hour. The handwriting is precise, the math beautiful. This isn't just art, it's irrigation logistics. He taps a wedge on the tablet. Too little water and the fig trees wilt, he explains. Too much and the planters flood. You nod. So it has to be. Just right. He grins. Every day, all year. This is calculated balance. Babylonian gardeners weren't just green thumbs. They were geometry experts with access to gradients, pump theory, and crop scheduling. You move upward again, stepping carefully on polished stones, and find yourself staring at an angled channel descending from a higher platform. At first, it looks like a fancy gutter. Then you realize it's a measured slope perfectly tilted to move water without spilling. The channel is carved with tiny notches, each one a unit of measurement. Water slows here, a worker explains, pointing at a curved section. We calculate the loss per curve and add more volume up top. You glance back at the tablets tucked under his arm. They contain estimates, observations, and one crucial phrase: compensate for wind and heat evaporation. You blink. Wait, they measured evaporation? Yes, he says, catching your look. And soil absorption rates too. You stare at the flowers lining the upper levels, pink lotus, bright marigolds, trailing vines. Each one growing in engineered soil, held in math-supported terraces, watered by equation-shaped canals. And suddenly you realize the hanging gardens weren't just a marvel of nature. They were a mathematical machine. A teacher appears nearby, guiding a pair of students with wax-covered tablets. He asks them to solve a problem if it takes 3 men walking the wheel 20 minutes to fill the upper cistern. How many minutes will it take if 1 man rests every 5th round? One student scowls. Depends which man rests. Exactly, the teacher replies. Math is numbers, yes, but also people. That lands heavy because it's true. Babylonian calculations always accounted for human variables, fatigue, habit, error. It's what made their systems work. You follow the winding stairs to the uppermost terrace. Up here, the view is dizzying. Below, Babylon unrolls like a dream, canals, roads, towers, and temples glowing in the warm light of day's end. At your feet, another channel gurgles. You kneel beside it and dip your fingers into the water. It's cool, slightly scented with rose petals. A scribe hands you a tablet and stylus. Here, he says, calculate the water volume per cycle. You stare at the figures: cistern capacity 240 quarts, wheel speed 3 revolutions per minute, bucket capacity 1.25 quarts. You squint, multiply, then divide. 3 minutes to fill it, you guess. He nods. Very good. Now add wind loss at 3%. Okay, not so good. You grin anyway and write your best estimate. There's something strangely comforting about this. A garden made possible by water wheels and percentages. Beauty engineered. Nature shaped gently by wedge marks and rope-measured slope. Historians still debate whether math truly powered the hanging gardens or if oral tradition and gut instinct played bigger roles. But here, seeing tablets stacked beside trowels and styluses tucked into belts, it's clear math made this grow. And more than that, it kept it growing, season to season, year to year. As twilight fades into full night, lanterns flicker to life between the trees. You sit at the edge of a terrace, legs dangling, and listen to the soft rush of water. Beneath you, somewhere deep in the stone heart of the garden, a wheel turns. And with each turn, math becomes motion. Water becomes whisper. And numbers bloom. You wake before dawn, the air still cool, the city still hushed. But as you wander the empty streets heading toward a temple courtyard, with soft light filtering in from above, something feels off. You can sense it in the way a priest rushes past you, robes swishing like whispered warnings. You hear it in the low mutters of a guard at the gate, and then you see chalk marks drawn hastily along a doorway. Something has gone wrong. You step into the courtyard and see a group of scribes gathered around a tablet. No multiple tablets laid out like a crime scene. A priest stands in the center, brows furrowed. They used the wrong calculation, he says almost to himself. And now the entire shipment is delayed. The canal was misaligned. The measurements were off. You move closer and listen. Turns out this wasn't a robbery. It was a mathematical misstep, a miscalculation in a building plan for a secondary canal system. The alignment was off by less than a hand's width, but the water spilled in the wrong direction. A week's labor lost, a minor disaster. And just like that, you're plunged into a very real truth. Babylonian math wasn't always beautiful. Sometimes it failed. The room swells with quiet tension as a younger scribe presents a defensive tablet. The data was correct, he insists, but the diagonal measurement was missing a half unit. A half unit, that's all it took. The priest closes his eyes. Then this isn't sabotage, it's incomplete geometry. You find yourself weirdly reassured and deeply unnerved. Math here is sacred, yes, but it's also fragile. The group begins reviewing previous calculations, pulling out old building specs and rechecking tables. There's no yelling, no panic, just methodical correction. Babylonian scribes, after all, are trained not just to calculate but to verify. One scribe mutters as he smooths a tablet with a damp cloth. I knew we should have used the triangle ratio instead. Another grumbles back. The triangle doesn't lie, people do. You pause at that. Because this is what happens when math becomes more than numbers, when it's used to build canals, ration food guide armies. When math fails in Babylon, so does the system. Historians still argue whether Babylon had formal auditing procedures, but tablets like these suggest a deep culture of review. Mistakes weren't erased, they were analyzed, studied, turned into lessons. You watch as one older scribe carefully draws a new triangle into the corner of a wet slab, annotating it with angles and proportions. He mutters to the others, "We use the 3-4-5 method next time. Safer." Ah, the old reliable. The triangle that guarantees a right angle. It's funny in a way. They had this tool all along, but sometimes people skip steps, even the best. You glance across the courtyard and notice another priest rolling up rope lengths into loops. Babylonian builders often used measured ropes as mobile tools, pulling straight lines, measuring distance, even laying out basic geometry without a tablet. You walk over and see the rope has knots at even intervals, 3 units, 4 units, 5 units, perfect for right-angle construction. He looks at you. Ropes don't forget. Maybe that's why mistakes like this sting so much. The materials remember. The land doesn't forgive lazy math. You ask, what happens now? The priest sighs. We start again. We recalculate. We realign. The gods may forgive, but the water will not. You nod. As the sun begins to rise, the courtyard shifts from problem solving to planning. One team will dig, another will map the new slope. One boy volunteers to watch the stars that night to ensure the timing of tides aligns with the angle of the gate. You realize that even in failure, Babylonian math was resilient. It didn't crumble, it adapted. The damaged tablet is set aside, not discarded, but kept. A warning maybe, a reminder. The priest presses a small mark into its corner, a zigzag wedge, the symbol for trouble or error. You wonder how many such tablets still exist buried under time, each one a story of almost right. Before you leave, one of the scribes hands you a fresh tablet and nods toward the rope lengths. Want to try? You hesitate, then carve a triangle into the clay using the classic 3-4-5 method. It's simple, clean, balanced. The scribe smiles. See, no water escapes that angle. As you walk out of the courtyard, the sun glinting off temple walls, you feel the weight of a strange truth. Even the most brilliant systems falter. But when the numbers fail in Babylon, they don't blame the gods. They check the math. You return to the city center as the morning heat begins to bloom, curling around clay walls and warming the rooftops. The marketplace is still setting up baskets of onions being stacked, fish laid out like slippery commas. But you have your eyes on something else. A classroom, or rather what looks like a classroom. You follow a group of students into a small courtyard where low benches and smooth clay surfaces line the perimeter. The teacher, a short man with eyebrows like angry caterpillars, beckons everyone closer. Today, he says, we face our greatest foe. A collective gasp, and then a groan. You don't even need to ask. You already know it's word problems. Yes, even 4000 years ago, word problems were the bane of students everywhere. He picks up a teaching tablet and reads in a booming voice. A merchant leaves Nipper with 3 donkeys, each carrying 60 jars of oil. Halfway to Babylon, one donkey breaks a leg and must be left behind. If each remaining donkey takes half of the abandoned jars, how many arrive in Babylon? One student moans audibly. Another mutters, "Why didn't the merchant just rent a cart?" The teacher raises an eyebrow. Less complaining, more calculating. You watch as the students begin scratching answers onto clay. Some start with the total number of jars. Others draw pictures of donkeys and try to see the transfer. And that's the magic here. Babylonian word problems weren't just math, they were narratives. Every equation was wrapped inside a tiny, dusty drama. You wander to the edge of the courtyard where older students work with more advanced problems. One boy's tablet reads, "A man buys a field. He sells half to his brother, then plants grain on the remaining portion. If the harvest produces 60 measures and grain grows at a rate of 3 measures per cubit, how many cubits wide is his land?" You blink. That's not a math problem, that's a plot line. It turns out that Babylonian math relied heavily on story-based logic. Not just because it made problems more relatable, but because it reflected real life. Land, grain, debts, inheritance. These were not abstract concepts. They were things you measured, calculated, and often argued over. Historians still debate whether these problems were primarily practical or educational. But scholars agree on one thing. Babylonians adored context. They believed that numbers made more sense when tied to the world. Not x equals 3, but the canal needs to be 3 cubits wide, or the barley dies. You glance over at another tablet. It features what can only be described as an algebraic soap opera. A man's house is twice as long as it is wide. The combined area is 720 120 square cubits. What are the dimensions of the house? You look at the student solving it. He's muttering to himself, let the width be x, then the length is 2x. Area equals length times width, so wait, that's algebra. Pure algebra, written in clay, with none of the symbols you're used to, but all the logic. Even the unknown variable existed. Babylonians didn't have letters like X, but they used phrases like that, which is not known of the thing. It wasn't symbolic, but narrative. And there's something weirdly comforting about that. You sit with one girl who's tackling a marriage problem. A dowry includes 3 fields. One is double the size of the second. The third is half the size of the first. The total is 90 square cubits. What are the sizes? You ask her, is this real? She shrugs. Probably. Turns out, many word problems were based on everyday Babylonian life. Inheritance divisions, loan repayments, canal disputes. Some even included romantic tension, like, if a man gives his fiancée 3 bracelets each worth twice the number of silver shekels as the necklace she wears and the total value is 90 shekels. You stop reading. You're solving relationship math, you say. She grins, and I still get it wrong. You ask the teacher if all students learn this way. He nods. Everyone learns formulas, but only the clever ones learn why they matter. And that's it, isn't it? Babylonian math wasn't afraid to be messy, dramatic, or weirdly specific. It wasn't just do the numbers line up, but do they mean something? You look again at the tablet with the limping donkey and realize the story helped. It anchored the numbers. It made the math stick. Before you go, the teacher reads one final problem. A man owns a triangle of land. One side is 20 cubits longer than the other. The diagonal divides it into 2 fields of equal area. What is the length of each side? You freeze. That's complicated, but also beautiful. Because math here isn't isolated. It's woven into geometry, life, land, emotion. And whether you're counting grain or balancing a broken donkey caravan, the numbers never stand alone. They walk in stories. Evening again and the city cools, but your mind doesn't. You're sitting on a rooftop now, tablet in your lap, staring at a scribbled mess of numbers and lines. The stars are out quiet and indifferent. Beside you, a student sighs and says, I hate calendars. You glance over, like, days of the week. She laughs without humor. Try lunar phases, intercalary months, and the fact that 12 doesn't fit neatly into a solar year. You're about to get acquainted with one of Babylon's most maddening problems, calendar math. It sounds simple, right? Count the days, note the months, add them up. But in Babylon, the sky ran the calendar, and the sky is a moody accountant. The Babylonians followed a lunar calendar with months that started when the first crescent moon appeared after conjunction. Each lunar month was about 29.5 days. Multiply that by 12, and you get a year of roughly 354 days. But wait, your modern brain is raising a red flag. A solar year is 365.25 days. That's a gap of 11 days every year. If you don't fix that, the months drift through the seasons like confused goats. Spring festivals show up in winter. Harvest feasts land in high summer. So what did the Babylonians do? They invented intercalation, the practice of adding an extra month every few years to catch up with the sun. It was elegant, it was messy, and it was a total guessing game. Historians still argue whether there was a formal cycle, or if kings just said, let's toss in a 13th month this year. Why not? But you can see the frustration carved in clay. You glance at a tablet marked, Year of the Short Eclipse. 12 months and 1 false. False, you ask. Your friend beside you rolls her eyes. A month that didn't count. It got declared, then taken back. Too cloudy to confirm the moon. Wait, the moon was blocked by clouds, so the month was canceled. Yep, no crescent, no month. You stare at the sky, suddenly nervous for time itself. This system had consequences. Festivals were tied to specific months. So were taxes, harvest schedules, and omens. If you misread the moon, you could throw off an empire's rhythm. You walk with her to a temple courtyard where priests and scribes gather monthly to watch the skies and document sightings. One priest is muttering, the moon rose 10 degrees south, visibility poor, delay proclamation. Another tablet is read aloud. The moon was seen on the 29th day, therefore the month ends, a new month begins. They write this down not with flair, but with certainty, because calendar decisions were mathematical, legal, and sacred. Even today, fragments of Babylonian calendars have been found with corrections scribbled in like cosmic footnotes. 8th month miscalculated harvest was early. Festival delayed due to poor lunar clarity. Month of Ishtar canceled, recalculated after signs from Venus. You laugh a little at that one. They canceled a whole goddess month. The priest nearby shrugs. She'll understand. But beneath the jokes, you feel the strain. This isn't like resetting a phone calendar. If the year fell out of sync, entire rituals could misalign. The moon told them when to sow, when to sacrifice, when to rest. The calendar was a spiritual engine, and math was the grease. You sit with a student who's trying to match lunar months to solar ones. She draws a circle, divides it into 12 wedges, then overlays it with a slightly offset circle of 13. See the drift, she says. After 3 years, we're off by 33 days. That's why we insert an extra month. You watch her shade in the overlap a month that exists only to patch the world back together. And yet, no matter how precise their tables got, they still had to look up to the moon itself. Because if the gods hid her, the scribes had to wait. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. They called it the silent sky, and there are tablets written entirely to capture its consequences. One of them reads, "No moon seen for 3 nights. The calendar pauses. Grain tithes delayed. The markets wait." You imagine a whole city on hold because the moon won't show her face. And that's where Babylonian math veers into something deeply poetic. Because they didn't just calculate time, they negotiated with it. They gave it flexibility, personality, a voice. They built equations with room for error and faith. Your student friend stretches and murmurs, "We track the heavens," but they don't always cooperate. She closes her tablet with a sigh. And yet, the barley still grows. You smile. Because that's the heart of Babylonian math, not perfection but persistence. A calendar that walks a crooked path and still finds spring. A moon that hides and still resets the world. And a civilization that understood one truth better than most. Time is not always yours to command. But if you're clever, patient, and just a little poetic, you can dance with it anyway. Night falls again, and with it comes a sky as dark and velvet smooth as ink. But you're not gazing up in awe. Not tonight. Tonight you're squinting at a zigzag. Not the kind you'd find on pottery or a child's tunic. No, this is a very specific mathematical zigzag. A jagged line sketched into clay, one that tracks the movement of something stranger than the moon. You're watching Venus go backwards. Well, sort of. A group of priest astronomers huddles around a tall clay slab mounted in a wooden frame. On it, a chart that looks suspiciously like a modern line graph. Horizontal lines mark days. Vertical ones track brightness and position. The subject, Venus, the planet, the goddess, the star that vanishes and returns with all the subtlety of a royal tantrum. You lean closer. The chart shows something that looks wrong. The numbers decrease, then increase again, then drop. What's happening here, you ask? One priest, an older man with a forehead deeply grooved by decades of watching things change, slowly replies, "Retrograde motion." You blink. Oh. Because now you remember Venus, when viewed from Earth, doesn't move in a neat, smooth loop across the sky. Every so often, it appears to reverse direction, drifting backwards for a few weeks before turning around and continuing on. Of course, Venus isn't actually moving backward. It's an illusion, a parallax effect created by Earth overtaking Venus in its orbit. But the Babylonians didn't have that explanation. They just had the zigzag. And somehow, with no telescopes, no Kepler, no heliocentrism, they tracked it anyway. They watched every rising, every setting, and every pause. They measured Venus's visibility against the horizon. They recorded how long she vanished. They even knew her full cycle, 584 days from first appearance to next. And how did they record this? With mathematical models, zigzag patterns, tables of dates, positions, intervals. This wasn't just stargazing. It was data science in sandals. You glance down at a tablet labeled Tablet 63 Venus Series. It's from a collection called the Enuma, Anu, and Lil, a vast catalog of celestial omens. If Venus disappears on the 12th day and returns after 9 days, famine shall be mild. If Venus sets on the 5th day of the month of Simanu, the king's reign shall be long. You read it twice. Wait a minute. They're predicting fate with planetary math. Historians still argue whether these predictions were taken literally or just performed ritually. But no matter the answer, one thing's clear: Babylonian astronomers weren't just observers. They were interpreters, and Venus was their diva. You sit beside one scribe who's recopying an older tablet. He taps the clay thoughtfully. Venus is soft but dangerous, he says. She blesses some years, curses others. We have to listen. You glance again at the zigzag graph. Its edges are sharp, unnatural. No curve, just stair steps approximating Venus's actual path. Why? Because Babylonians didn't graph with curves, they used piecewise linear models. It wasn't as smooth, but it was good enough. And more importantly, it was predictive. They weren't describing Venus, they were forecasting her. You look up at the stars and sure enough, there she is. Low on the horizon, bright enough to sting the eye, the evening star. You whisper her name like the scribes do Dilbit. One of the priests lights a small lamp. When she disappears, he says there is danger. When she returns, there is change. He pulls out a new clay tablet blank. It's time to record the next phase. Together, the group begins murmuring figures, dates, brightness, location relative to Aldebaran. You recognize some of the values too, 15 for times 6 for degrees above horizon. And you realize they're not just watching Venus, they're wrestling her into numbers. And she does not go quietly. You help carry one finished tablet to the archive shelves. It's stamped, dated, and placed carefully beside dozens of others, each one a frozen moment in a planet's unpredictable dance. You ask, why keep all of them? The priest shrugs. So the future remembers. Even if we're wrong, that answer sticks. Because they weren't always right. Their zigzag models weren't perfect. Sometimes Venus vanished earlier. Sometimes she stayed hidden longer. The math faltered, the pattern bent. But the Babylonians, they kept going anyway. One priest calls you back before you leave. He presses a small tablet into your hand. Try your own prediction, he says. Mark the day Venus fades. Guess when she'll return. You nod and scratch a rough date into the clay. Will you be right? Maybe, maybe not. But here in Babylon, the value is in the effort, the reaching for order even when the stars zig when they're supposed to zag. Because math isn't always about clarity. Sometimes it's about keeping your eyes open when the sky goes strange. Morning in Babylon begins with the quiet rhythm of footsteps, merchants opening stalls, scribes arriving at work, temple assistants, sweeping fallen leaves into neat little piles. But today, something different draws you across the courtyard. A group of students stands in a circle surrounding a single tablet laid out on a low stone platform. One of them whispers, "This one changed everything." You step closer. At first, it looks like any other clay record, carefully pressed symbols, smooth surface, the occasional wedge crumbled at the edge. But then you notice the numbers around the edges. They're arranged in a circle. That's not common. A teacher appears, his hands dusted with clay. He nods toward the tablet. The 360-degree circle, he says. That's where it begins. You blink. They invented that. He smiles. They did the math. We gave it the name. You kneel and look closer. The tablet is split like a pie 12. Even slices, then each of those divided again and again until there are 360 tiny divisions ringing the edge. It's geometry in motion. The Babylonians, already obsessed with base 60 and divisible numbers, realized that 360 was just right. It divides easily by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20. The list goes on. Perfect for measuring things that turn wheel star seasons. Historians still argue whether this division was based on astronomical observations like the number of days in a year, or whether it just happened to work beautifully. But here in the shadow of the ziggurat with dust on your hands and a circle before you, the result feels almost inevitable. You run your fingers gently along the perimeter. Each tiny wedge is 1 degree. One step in a full rotation. One whisper in a long conversation between humanity and motion. You watch as a student uses a piece of string and a stylus to recreate the same circle on fresh clay. She measures carefully, dividing it into equal 6, then each 6th into tenths, then each 10th into 6 more. She works not with rulers, but with ratios. And soon she's looking at a full Babylonian circle, neatly divided, infinitely useful. The teacher leans in. They didn't call it degrees, of course. That word came later, but they knew the shape was special. And it was. Because with this circle, they could measure angles, track the sun, map land plots, build temples, align walls and irrigation channels, chart the movement of time itself, all within a perfect loop. You glance to the side and see a diagram of a star chart. Constellations are plotted not with random dots, but with angular coordinates measured off the same 360-degree system. Even your modern clock, the one on your phone, the one ticking in your mind, owes its structure to this circle. 60 minutes, 60 seconds, 12 hours, all pulled from this dusty clay geometry. You watch a priest step forward with a small sundial. He places it gently on the tablet's center, aligns its shadow, and checks the position. 9th hour, he says, give or take a sand grain. You marvel. It still works. He nods. The sky hasn't changed. only we have. Nearby, another student is working on a wheel. Literally, a cartwheel. He's measuring the circumference, checking how many turns it makes over a certain distance. With the 360 division system, he can predict exactly how many revolutions are needed to cover one furlong. No GPS, just circles and ratios. Another uses the system to lay out a spiral garden. Equal sectors, each one filled with herbs. Each turn of the spiral timed to seasonal plantings. Geometry feeds us, she says, and pleases the gods. Even temple ceremonies followed this structure. Some rituals required priests to walk around a ziggurat exactly one full turn, 360 steps, each one a degree. As they walked, they chanted. The same math that guided wheels guided worship. You sit on the edge of the platform, staring at the elegant precision of the circle. It's not perfect. Some lines are uneven. 1 degree wedge looks a bit too fat, but it works. It always has. And it reminds you that perfection was never the point. The Babylonians didn't wait for flawless circles. They made the best with what they had: clay strings, sun, and endless patience. They made something durable, something that could be handed forward. You look at your hands, then at the circle, then at the modern world tucked invisibly into the system. The way we measure angles, the way we turn doorknobs, the way we orbit, rotate, spin, all of it still dancing within a Babylonian circle. As the sun rises higher and the temple bells chime in soft metallic thuds, you run your fingers around the edge of the tablet once more. One circle, 360 whispers, and 4,000 years of continuity. Babylon is noisy today, not the pleasant buzz of the marketplace or the gentle lull of chanting priests. This is a different sound, urgent, clattering, sharp. You follow it through the city's western quarter until you come upon a strange sight. Rows of carts, crates stacked high with grain, oil, and tools. And beside them, a dozen scribes, each one seated at a small stone bench, furiously working on logistics math. Today isn't about poetry or stars. Today is about supplies, soldiers, and the numbers that keep an empire on its feet. You ease into the scene just as a harried official snaps. If we don't move 600 rations to Sipper by next moon, the garrison will revolt. A scribe nearby doesn't even blink. He nods, dips his stylus, and begins scribbling. 1 wagon, = 40 rations. Distance to Sipper, = 80 leagues. Travel time per wagon, = 10 days. Oxen rotation required, = 2 per wagon. The math clicks into place like gears in a machine. You lean in closer. Are they moving an army? A younger assistant glances up. Always, somewhere. Because Babylon wasn't just temples and scholars. It was a machine of motion, people, grain, labor orders, all requiring precise calculation to keep moving. And when it didn't, things fell apart. You overhear a tense conversation. How many guards needed to protect the shipment? 10 per caravan. We only have 6. Then pay for silence or pray no one notices. Not exactly in the textbook, but practical. Nearby, a scribe works on food distribution tables for workers digging new canal routes. Each row shows number of workers per team, days worked, beer rations per day, total compensation in grain. You stare at a column marked penalty days. What's that, you ask? He shrugs, days deducted for laziness, illness, or insubordination. You glance at the numbers. This one poor worker has 6 full days removed and his total beer ration slashed in half. That seems harsh. It's math, the scribe replies, with a tone that makes you think of spreadsheet managers everywhere. Historians still argue whether Babylonian logistics were truly this detailed or whether scribes added embellishments to make themselves look efficient. But the tablets don't lie. They're packed with calculations for everything from brick quotas to mule rental fees. You pass another team tallying military inventories. A cracked tablet shows chariots 48, arrows 3600, bronze helmets 112, rations for soldiers 9000 measures of grain. Even the shields are weighed not by emotion, but by shekels of bronze. Across from them, another scribe mutters over a tablet listing construction needs. If we build a wall 100 cubits long and 10 high with bricks, 1 cubit wide, how many do we need? You're already calculating in your head, 1,000,000 close. He solves it faster. But then he flips to the next problem. Assume 10% of bricks are broken during transport. How many extra should be made? You raise an eyebrow. They're budgeting for waste. Ancient Babylonian overage planning, the wisdom of every supply chain manager etched into clay. Further down the line, a royal courier storms in with bad news. A shipment of wood from the north is stuck in a flooded pass. Within minutes, another scribe updates a tablet. Route B activated. Add 3 days delay. Shift rations accordingly. It's mesmerizing. Babylon wasn't just good at math, they were good at adjusting the math. And not just because they loved numbers, because without it, the city starved. Armies fractured, roads fell apart, nothing moved. You stop at a final tablet. It reads like a to-do list from the gods. Measure rations for priestly ceremonies. Assign guards to temple storage. Pay scribes in barley or silver. Audit tools return from royal warehouse. You chuckle. Even the accountants had accountants. One student, barely older than a child, is learning how to create a delivery docket. Start with the number of items, his teacher says. Then the destination, the date, and the witness signature. He adds, and always double the count in your head. They lie. You raise an eyebrow. Who lies? Everyone, he says with a smile. That's why we use math. And that right there is the unspoken philosophy of Babylonian logistics. People are inconsistent. Numbers can't afford to be. As the sun sets, you sit on the edge of the supply platform, watching carts roll out toward distant cities, each one tagged with its own tablet, its own calculations, its own quiet promise that somewhere someone did the math. Babylon's empire wasn't just built on bricks and ziggurats. It was built on inventory lists. You wake to the sound of wind rustling palm leaves and the soft rhythmic tapping of a stylus against clay. Another morning in Babylon, but today the breeze carries something new, a different kind of tension. You follow the sound into a shadowy room tucked behind the main library. Inside, you find a row of older scribes hunched over tablets, not solving equations, but correcting them. Welcome to the world of Babylonian error checking. At first, it seems strange. Aren't clay tablets permanent, set in stone literally? But as you approach the table, you spot what looks like a scratched out line and another pressed over it. Tiny diagonal slashes mark incorrect entries. One scribe carefully chips off a thin layer of clay and represses a number. How do you erase, you ask? An old man with an ink-stained robe looks up amused. Very carefully. It turns out Babylonian scribes had an entire system for managing mistakes. Fresh clay could be smoothed and reinscribed. Dried tablets could be scraped. Some errors were marked with small signs, cuneiform emojis of apology. You pick up one such tablet. It's filled with multiplication problems. At the bottom, a note. Corrected on the second day of Nisanu, original result false due to miscounting lines. There's something comforting about this ancient footnote. Even here in a society that worshiped precision, mistakes happened. And more importantly, they were expected. You observe one scribe double-checking a grain distribution ledger. He recites, 60 workers, 2 rations each per day, 12 days of work, total. You blink, 440 rations. He nods, but the record says 400, so either someone stole 40 or someone can't multiply. You smirk, and which is worse? Depends who asks, he replies. Historians still debate how widespread these checking practices were, but evidence suggests Babylonian math included quality control layers. In official documents, scribes often had to repeat calculations or provide a reverse check multiplication, followed by division, for instance, to confirm results. It wasn't just about getting the right answer, it was about proving it. Nearby, a student is being quizzed. He's written a geometric equation about triangle areas. His teacher frowns and asks, what happens if the base is mismeasured? The boy pauses, then the area is wrong. And what's the penalty for that? The teacher presses. Food shortages, the boy mumbles. It's not hyperbole. A miscalculation in a land plot could mean tax errors, missed harvests, or legal disputes. Babylonian math wasn't abstract, it had real consequences. You look at a different tablet, a long division table. It includes side calculations, scratch work essentially. It's messy, chaotic, and very human. Somewhere in the margin, someone's scribbled a personal note. Third mistake today, my head is full of numbers and soup. You chuckle. Even in 1800, BCE burnout was real. One tablet, badly cracked, features a problem partially solved and then abandoned. A different hand picks it up later and finishes it with a new note. First line wrong, corrected, the rest preserved. You ask a passing assistant, why save the wrong ones? He shrugs, so we don't repeat them. That hits harder than expected. You step outside for air and find yourself beside a massive wall, one you hadn't noticed before. On it are dozens of tablets embedded directly into the mud brick. Most are intact, some are broken. Others were clearly test problems written and left behind. An outdoor chalkboard of sorts. And it reveals something beautiful. Babylon wasn't afraid of showing its errors. Instead, it preserved them as warnings, lessons, or sometimes just records of honest effort. You run your hand along one of the wall tablets. The characters are slightly warped, hurried. A young scribe's work, maybe. The numbers are off, the solution incomplete. But next to it, a perfectly copied, corrected version right beside the flawed one. Side by side. Wrong and right. Babylonian math wasn't sterile, it was layered, iterative, forgiving. The next courtyard over is full of students working in pairs. One calculates, the other checks. If they agree, the tablet gets signed. If not, they swap roles and try again. You're not allowed to copy, says one girl. But we're required to disagree politely. Conflict resolution, but with fractions. Even their proverbs capture the spirit. The wise scribe checks twice. The lazy one builds short canals. A dry way of saying bad math leads to flooded fields. As the sun dips lower, the error-checking scribes file their tablets into a special archive reviewed and verified. Another shelf holds unresolved problems. Yet another curious mistakes. Because sometimes a wrong answer sparks new discovery. And you realize something. Here in Babylon, math is not perfection, it's persistence. And even mistakes, if preserved, can guide someone else toward truth. You look at your hands still speckled with clay and smile. Maybe you're not solving anything tonight, but you're learning what it means to keep trying. You're woken by a whisper, not a voice, exactly more like a quiet hum that tugs at the edge of thought. It's still dark, but a faint light flickers from the room next door. You rise, stretch, and follow the glow drawn towards something quieter than even numbers. Inside, you find a scribe sitting alone. No busy classrooms, no lists of supplies or planetary epicycles. Just a single clay tablet, a steady lamp, and silence. He's writing a riddle. You ease onto the floor beside him and glance over. The symbols are arranged oddly, not a calculation, but a puzzle. And suddenly you've stumbled into one of Babylon's most curious corners: recreational math. Not war math, not tax math, not temple math. Fun math. The scribe leans over and reads aloud in a slow, measured tone. A stone and a brick weigh 30 shekels together. The stone weighs 10 more than the brick. What is the weight of each? You blink, squint, then whisper, the brick is 10, the stone is 20. He smiles but doesn't nod. That's not the point, he says. The point is to wonder. In Babylon, math wasn't only about precision, it was also about play. Riddles, logic games, trick problems passed from student to student like whispered jokes. Historians still argue whether these were officially part of scribe training or more like brain teasers shared during breaks. But dozens of examples have survived proof that even 4,000 years ago, humans loved to be puzzled. Another scribe enters holding a cracked but much-loved tablet. On it, a man buys a goat for 3 silver pieces, sells it for 4, buys it back for 5, and sells again for 6. How much profit? You smile. 2. But the group shakes their heads. No one laughs, he loses time, gains suspicion, and the goat's probably cursed. Okay, maybe not the answer you expected. You realize quickly that many of these problems come with multiple answers, some mathematical, others philosophical. They're designed to test not just numbers, but the mind behind them. You glance at another puzzle. Half of a number plus its fourth equals 30. What is the number? Your sleepy brain stirs. That's algebra, ancient clay-baked algebra. And the solution? Let the number be x, 1/2 x plus 1/4 x, equals sign 30 and 3/4 x, equals sign 30x, equals sign 40. Yes, it still holds. Even now, even here. The scribe looks impressed. You think quickly. You reply, I had a calculator once. He doesn't know what that is, but nods politely anyway. The night wears on. You sit by the fire with the scribes and pass around more puzzles. Some geometric, a square field has a gate on one side. Some financial, 2 merchants meet with unequal loads, and some just silly. There are 7 houses in a city. Each house has 7 cats. Each cat kills 7 mice. Each mouse would have eaten 7 grains. How many grains saved? You don't even try. It's too late, too warm, too perfect. But someone else starts calculating aloud and the room fills with quiet chuckles. These riddles served multiple purposes in ancient Babylon. They trained young minds to think flexibly. They entertained when the temple halls grew too solemn. They even offered moral lessons disguised in numbers. You come across one last example etched carefully into a stone near the doorway. A man divides his inheritance among 3 sons. One gets half, one a third, and one a ninth. How can he divide exactly? The answer, you're told, is in the common denominator, but also in the act of fairness. Because Babylonian math wasn't just about balance in numbers, it reflected balance in life. They believed in measured justice and harmony, in proportions that mirrored the heavens. Even their riddles pointed back to something deeper. One teacher tells you a favorite saying, "A sharp mind is not sharpened on truth, but on the edge of a question." You lean your head back against the cool stone wall, and that idea echoes in your chest. Not all problems need solving. Some are meant to keep you curious. Some are meant to keep you awake, but in the nicest way possible. Or maybe if the stars align and the room is dim enough, these ancient puzzles might lull you to sleep, carried on the whisper of minds who lived and laughed and loved numbers long before you. The fire crackles. Someone miscalculates a riddle and groans. Someone else starts it over from the top. And you close your eyes and drift in that lovely space between logic and dreams, where questions stretch out like constellations and the answers, well, they're somewhere out there too. You awaken to the sound of dripping water. Not the kind that leaks from rooftops or pools beneath stairs, but the controlled, methodical drop of a clepsydra, a Babylonian water clock. Somewhere in a temple chamber, a copper bowl slowly fills droplet by droplet from a narrow spout above. When full, the vessel tips resets and the cycle begins again. Tick. You're in the presence of ancient timekeeping, not just as ritual, but as mathematics in motion. A priest adjusts the spout, slightly narrowing the stream. It was too fast, he murmurs more to himself than anyone else. They'll start the ceremony too early. You sit beside him, you use that to tell time. He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he points to a nearby tablet. On it, numbers, columns, diagrams of the clepsydra bowl at various levels with corresponding times scratched beside each. The whole thing is a manual, a calibration chart, a mathematical guide to passing hours. Babylon didn't just observe time, it engineered it. The priest explains the water bowl holds a known volume. The spout releases a measured drip. Over a night, the drops accumulate in precise amounts, allowing priests to divide the darkness into ritual slots. You look around. One scribe is marking sunrise intervals based on shadow lengths. Another is using a gnomon, a vertical rod, to track noon's exact moment. And at the far end of the courtyard, a group of students sits in a semicircle, calculating calendar corrections. You wander over. They're working on a tablet that begins with this: 12 lunar months = 354 days. Solar year = 365 1/4. Every 3 years, add an extra month. You blink. They knew about leap years. A teacher grins. In a way, the Babylonians understood that the lunar calendar didn't align neatly with the solar year. Festivals began to drift. Planting seasons crept out of sync. So they invented a system: intercalary months, an extra month slipped in every few years to realign time. Historians still argue whether these adjustments were decided by observation, political convenience, or astrological events. But however they chose, they understood something critical. Time wasn't static, it needed management. And they were more than ready to do it. One student recites, year 1, 12 months, year 2, 12 months, year 3, 13 months, repeat cycle. Another tablet shows an inscription about eclipses, warning that if the moon appears before the expected time, misfortune may follow unless the calendar is reset. It's part math, part mysticism, but behind it all, a fierce desire to track time with meaning. You stroll through the courtyard and notice something strange. A narrow trench filled with water runs alongside the wall. A priest uses a stick to track the sun's reflection, noting the angle. It's not just a trench, he tells you, it's a horizontal sundial. You raise an eyebrow. How accurate is it? He grins. Ask me at noon. You do. He's within a minute. Elsewhere, a young girl plays with a tablet filled with concentric circles, each one representing a different seasonal division. She presses tiny dots into the edges, the months, the days, the positions of stars. Why so many rings, you ask? To keep the gods from being early, she says with a shrug. Fair enough. But the truth is, these rings aren't just cute. They're sophisticated. Babylonian timekeeping didn't stop at days and months. They had hour angles, planetary cycles, and detailed schemes for dividing time into practical blocks. They even measured work sessions, tracking how many bricks could be laid in a half day, or how many lines a scribe could copy before the next water bowl tipped. You pass a worker chiseling marks into a temple wall, each notch tied to a festival, a moon phase, a shadow line. It's a stone calendar, permanent, bold, slightly tilted. Even time, it seems, needs a good foundation. You ask one priest, what happens if the calendar drifts? He frowns. The rains won't come, the gods will be confused, and the barley won't know when to grow. A poetic way to say math matters. Babylonian time wasn't just about clocks and calendars. It was about alignment. between the heavens, the earth, the temples, and the human heart. As the day draws to a close, the water bowl tips again. Tick. The priest marks another interval. Another sliver of the day passed, calculated, recorded, and gently folded into eternity. You sit back and close your eyes. Water drips, shadows stretch, a star peeks through the fading blue above. And in that moment, time feels less like a ticking clock and more like a whisper shaped by hands long gone still, guiding the rhythm of today. A hush falls over Babylon as night creeps in, wrapping rooftops in indigo and bronze. The heat of the day surrenders to a cooler breeze, and overhead the stars begin their nightly procession. But here on this rooftop terrace, you're not just stargazing, you're measuring the universe. A priest astronomer adjusts a bronze sighting tube mounted on a wooden tripod. He tilts it toward the rising eastern sky, eyes squinting with intense familiarity. "You're just in time," he says without turning. "Jupiter's due." You glance upward. Sure enough, a brilliant dot begins to rise just above the horizon. And with it, you're drawn into Babylon's most mind-bending mathematical legacy, astronomy. Not the dreamy kind with wishes and constellations, but the rigorous, calculated art of tracking, predicting, and documenting the heavens. A scribe, seated cross-legged beside you, opens a thick clay tablet, more like a slab, and points to a series of repeating lines and symbols. They're written in cuneiform shorthand designed for rapid notation. This tablet, you learn, is an ephemeris, an ancient star chart, complete with predicted positions, time intervals, and observed anomalies. "Jupiter has a 12-year cycle," he says quietly. "We've followed it since my grandfather's time." You blink. "That long?" He smiles. "We don't blink much up here." And he's not joking. The Babylonians were obsessed with repetition in the skies. The path of Venus, the lunar eclipse, cycles, the erratic motion of Mars, all were recorded obsessively. And over generations, patterns emerged. Historians still argue whether these records were purely observational or if they were coupled with some form of early calculation theory. But it's clear the Babylonians developed arithmetical models to predict planetary movements, not just map them, predict them. Another priest gestures toward a tall, weathered pillar in the corner of the terrace. On it are 18 tiny holes. Each one aligns with a specific celestial event: solstices, equinoxes, heliacal risings. At different times of the year, sunlight or starlight filters through exactly one hole, casting a line of gold across a nearby measuring table. You trace one such line with your fingers. It's faint but precise. "They built this for the gods," someone whispers. "But the numbers are for us." You sit in silence for a while as the sky darkens fully. The Big Dipper appears. Orion rises. A bright meteor zips past. And the scribes take notes. Every shift, every flicker, every change documented in clay. You walk over to a collection of tablets laid out like a library. Each one tracks the position of a celestial body, along with its historical appearances, odd behavior, and related omens. One tablet reads, "When the moon disappears before the 6th hour, kings must not eat bread that day." Another, "If Venus rises bright and early, the crops will be plentiful." At first, they seem like superstition, but dig deeper and you realize they're built on data. Decades, sometimes centuries of observation baked into belief. You ask, did they understand what the planets really were? A priest chuckles. They didn't need to. They knew where they'd be, and that was enough. The predictive models used step numerical patterns, tables that increased and decreased in defined sequences to represent motion. In one astonishing case, Babylonian mathematicians even used a form of trapezoidal area calculation to determine a planet's changing speed over time. That's right, non-uniform motion, centuries before calculus, on clay. You spot a damaged tablet labeled with the word SAR and ask what it means. That's the Saros cycle, the priest explains. Eclipses repeat every 18 years, 11 days. We noticed it, and they did. Babylonian astronomers were the first to record and use the Saros cycle to forecast eclipses, which gave them immense power, both scientifically and politically. You step to the terrace edge and gaze upward again. The stars feel closer now, not because they've moved, but because you understand just a little how humans first reached them, not with rockets, but with math patience and deeply sore necks. One apprentice brings you a fresh clay tablet and stylus. "You want to try?" he asks. You press the stylus into the clay mark, a star's current position, the time, and the horizon angle. It's shaky, uneven, probably wrong, but it's yours. And you smile, because here under the same stars, you're doing what they did, turning the sky into numbers, the numbers into stories, and the stories into something lasting. A wind picks up. Someone lights a brazier. And with Jupiter now fully risen, the watchers of the sky lean forward not just to see it move, but to measure how far it's come. The wind is quieted, dawn isn't far, but before the sun rises and wakes Babylon's courtyards, you're already walking through a different kind of hall. It smells like warm earth and faint ink. The air is hushed like a library, but somehow older. You've stepped inside the archives. Rows and rows of shelves stretch before you. But these aren't shelves of books, they're lined with tablets. Hundreds, thousands, some cracked, some missing corners, others so smooth and clean they look freshly pressed. This isn't just math, it's memory baked in clay. A scribe greets you quiet but warm and motions toward a wooden bench. Be gentle, he says. Some of them remember things no one else does. You take a seat and he brings out a wide, flat tablet. Not ornate, but surprisingly heavy. It's covered in neat columns, some of which look oddly familiar. These are records of land surveys, he explains. Length with taxes owed. You scan the numbers, but why keep it? He shrugs. So we don't forget who owns what, or how we measured it. Babylonians weren't just brilliant with math, they were obsessed with documentation. Every transaction, calculation, and observation was written down, archived in a vast web of interlinked knowledge. A tablet to your left shows temple expenses. 4 shekels for cedar oil, 2 shekels for lamp repair, 12 loaves for the gods. Another details a boundary dispute between 2 farmers. There's math, yes, but also witness names, dates, and weather conditions. You realize math wasn't separate from life, it was stitched into every part of it. Historians still argue how accessible these records were. Some believe temple officials hoarded them for power. Others suggest communal use. Either way, the scale is staggering. A new tablet is placed in front of you, this one from the House of Tablets in Sippar, one of Babylon's greatest libraries. It's filled with diagrams, problem sets, explanations of why a certain equation works, and 3 versions of how to solve it. It reads like a textbook. And yes, it's 700 years old. You trail your finger along one margin and find something odd, a small hand-drawn fish. You ask the scribe. Correction symbol, he says. Or maybe a joke, or maybe the student was hungry. Fair. Further down the hall, another set of tablets is being cataloged. These are astronomical, and a team of scribes is debating which order they should go in. The lunar records follow the planetary ones. No, this series is organized by predictive function. They're not yelling, but it's clear curation matters. One student passes you a tablet so thin it looks like it might crumble. It's a receipt from a beer shipment. Not impressive at first glance, until he explains. This is the first time we calculated delivery time by distance over oxen pace. He's proud, rightfully so. Even the mundane in Babylon was touched by applied math. You imagine a courier riding days to deliver 6 jars of ale, and someone somewhere tracking exactly how long that should have taken. Then another tablet catches your eye. This one's personal. To my son Nabuzir, study these numbers as your grandfather did. They are the path to safety and wisdom. It hits differently. This isn't just math anymore. This is inheritance. Line after line, century after century, humans scratching understanding into wet clay, hoping it might dry in time to last forever. You ask, what happens when these break? The archivist gestures to a section filled with fragments. Carefully labeled, cataloged, reconstructed. We don't throw anything out, he says. Even a corner with one number tells us something. In one cracked shard, you spot a familiar formula. In another, a child's doodle beside half a multiplication table. In a third, just 2 numbers 60 and 3,600. You recognize them now, sexagesimal base units. Even in ruins, they whisper. As dawn seeps through the shutters, the archivist begins to close the room. He takes your hand, presses a tiny object into your palm. It's a clay token smaller than your thumb, marked with just 2 symbols. What's it for, you ask? He shrugs. Could be anything. That's the fun of it. You clutch it tight. A number, a name, a reminder. In Babylon, every mark meant something, even if you didn't always know what. And as the doors creak shut behind you, you realize Babylonian math wasn't just science, it was story-keeping. Each tablet, each record, each scratch of stylus to clay, a testament to the ancient belief that knowledge matters and that someone someday would come looking. Like you, the morning sun spills gold across Babylon's rooftops, but you're already outside the city walls, following a narrow path that winds between irrigation canals and endless barley fields. Your guide today is not a scribe or a priest, but a surveyor. He wears a simple linen robe and carries a crooked measuring rod, a knotted rope, and a tablet tucked under one arm. His sandals are muddy, his pace brisk, and you're here to witness something rare: math on the move. We're checking the royal fields, he says, barely glancing back. They say last year's boundary markers drifted. You think he's joking? He's not. Babylonian land math wasn't theoretical, it was sweaty, dusty, and deeply personal. Farmers depended on accurate measurements not just to plant, but to prove ownership. One misplaced line could spark a feud that echoed for generations. You reach the first marker, a stone slab half buried in reeds. The surveyor kneels, counts the paces from the canal's edge, and frowns. 2 cubits off. Either the canal moved, or the stone did. He gestures for you to help. You hold one end of the rope while he stretches the other toward a small clay tablet, today's field sketch. It's marked with symbols, squares, and short equations. See this corner, he points. Should be a right angle, but the ratio is off. Then he says something that makes you pause. 3, 4, 5. You blink. A Pythagorean triple. He nods. We've used that for generations. Historians still argue whether Babylonians discovered the Pythagorean theorem before the Greeks. But there's little doubt they used it practically and often to create right angles and ensure land plots were exact. Not in theory. In the muddy middle of a field where one wrong angle meant someone got less barley. The surveyor adjusts the stone scribbles, a quick correction, and moves on. Next one, he mutters. This time we'll use the triangle method. You watch as he marks a point, steps 3 units north, then 4 units east. The diagonal he measures is, yes, exactly 5. Perfect right angle. It's elegant, fast, brilliant, and older than almost any math you learned in school. Farther down the path, another team is rebuilding an irrigation canal. Their math is more fluid, literally. One man tracks water flow per minute, another adjusts the sluice gate with careful precision. A third sketches a simple diagram in the dirt. They're calculating volume. Not in liters, but in kur, a Babylonian unit used for both grain and water. You squat beside one of them. He's using a string and a weight to measure depth. Too shallow, he mutters. Water won't reach the western fields by noon. A few quick adjustments to the slope and the canal flows just fast enough. Math here isn't elegant scribbles, it's engineering survival. Nearby, a woman checks the gradient of a terrace wall using a reed tied with knots every cubit. She adjusts a stone-wiped sweat from her brow and hums an old tune. You ask what she's doing. Making sure it doesn't collapse on my garden. Respect. You move on to a grain storage area where workers are tallying sacks as they arrive. A clerk counts aloud, 6,100, 2,180, and a young boy presses numbers into a wet clay tally sheet. The base 60 system again, still going strong. A small crowd gathers near a wagon, arguing over whether it carried the full agreed load. The clerk produces a reference tablet and starts checking weights and distances. It's less courtroom, more logistics hub, but the math still sings through every step. One man insists the cart was delayed by a broken axle. The math suggests otherwise. The angle of the wheel track says it turned here, the clerk mutters. Too sharp for a broken cart. He stopped to rest. Caught by trigonometry. Not a good look. You realize slowly that Babylonian math wasn't something separate from life. It wasn't done at a desk or just for priests. It walked through fields, dipped into canals, checked walls, settled debts, fixed roads, measured roofs, and caught cheaters. It was in the hands of farmers, on the tongues of merchants, and in the feet of surveyors walking lines across ancient earth. And always it came with stakes. Too much barley, you owed taxes. Too little, you owed an apology. Wrong angle, your field got smaller. Broken rope, you start over. And still they did it day after day, year after year, guided by ropes, ratios, memory, and a whole lot of clay. You reach the final marker, a weathered stone half swallowed by grass. The surveyor digs it out, brushes it clean, and nods. This one's true. He signs a tablet with a flourish, then presses it into a basket with the others. The work is done, for today at least. As you follow the road back toward Babylon, you glance over your shoulder. Fields shimmer in the heat. Water flows, and numbers quiet and visible hold it all together. The city looms again, warm with the low glow of the afternoon. You enter not through a gate this time, but through a side passage used by merchants, a shortcut that smells of spices, dust, and sun-warmed linen. And waiting for you in the square ahead is math's final Babylonian home, the marketplace. No temples, no tablets, no water clocks or eclipses. Just trade, just deals, and just about the fastest arithmetic in Mesopotamia. The vendors here aren't formally trained scribes, but don't let that fool you. Every merchant calculates faster than you blink, often without stylus or tablet. A seller waves a handful of dried figs at a customer who shakes his head and offers a counterweight of barley. Back and forth, no numbers spoken aloud, but the math is alive in the air. A young girl, barefoot, sharp-eyed, maybe 10, sits behind a stall of copper trinkets. A man approaches with silver. She doesn't blink, just tilts her head. 2 rings for 1 shekel, she says, or 5 for 2. You furrow your brow. Wait, is that a better deal? She grins. Only if you like math. You buy the 5? As you munch on the fig someone handed you without asking, you notice a pair of men arguing not angrily, but animatedly over the weight of a bundle of dates. One insists it's 9 mana, the other swears it's just under 8. They fetch a standard weight block, place it on the scale, and pour out a pile of fine sand into a counterpan for precision. The balance swing settles and proves the younger man right. That's Babylonian verification, someone whispers to you. Prove your math or pack your dates. You wander further and find yourself in a side alley used by moneylenders. Clay seals and tablets are stacked on a table. A bearded man, deeply focused, presses figures into a tablet using a tiny stylus tipped with obsidian. He's calculating interest. Compound interest for a debt recorded 6 months ago, with different repayment terms for missed months. You peer at the figures. It's not simple, but you see the base 60 pattern, the daily multipliers, the margin noted in a separate column. You ask, how often does someone actually pay back on time? He sighs, as often as the moon stays full forever. Fair point. The math of lending in Babylon was advanced and ruthless. Interest was calculated not just yearly, but often monthly, sometimes even daily, depending on the lender's preferences. A missed deadline might double the principal, or worse, incur temple fines. Historians still argue whether this system was fair exploitative or some messy hybrid, but the arithmetic behind it, elegant, brutal, precise. You watch as another lender explains a loan in progress to a merchant. He writes, principal 1 shekel, silver interest 20% per annum, due in 1 year, 6 months, total repayment, 1 shekel, 6 jinn. You pause. Wait, how did you? He grins. The formula is in my blood. Not metaphorical. Many Babylonian merchants passed down mental tables, oral arithmetic tricks from parent to child. Not everyone needed to write it. Many just knew. Further on, you notice conversion tables scratched into a wall, weights to lengths to volumes, shekels, to minas dates, to barley to beer. Even beer has its own math. You stop at a stall selling fresh loaves and pitchers of sudsy brew. The vendor sees your hesitation and points to a clay chart nailed above his table. Half a loaf is 1 measure, he says, but 2 beers is a full meal. Math logic, not quite, but marketing, brilliant. And speaking of food, near the center of the market, a group of street performers gather. One stands on a crate and begins a game. Who here can guess the weight of this stone? A small crowd gathers. Guesses fly, 7 minas, 12 9 and 3/5. The performer winks and lifts the stone onto a balance. A boy from earlier, the one who sold sandals, wins. His prize, a scribbled riddle scratched into a piece of clay. I am 2 numbers. Add me and I become 6. Multiply me and I become 9. What am I? You grin. 3 and 3, no. 3 and 2. Wait. 1 and 5. Too many options. The crowd buzzes numbers, flying like fig seeds in the breeze. In the middle of it all, you see it clearly now. Babylonian math wasn't just in the temples, schools, or observatories. It was in bread, it was in beer, it was in daily life. Not sacred, not elite, lived. You walk slowly back through the market, listening not for shouting or sales, but for the rhythm beneath it. The quiet hum of thousands of calculations, keeping life in motion. A man haggling over cloth length, a woman teaching her daughter to count with pebbles, a child drawing base 60 spirals in the dirt, and everywhere the comfort of numbers. You smile, not because the math is easy, but because it's still here, echoing through transactions, negotiations, jokes, and jugs of wine, holding the world together, 1 shekel at a time. Evening wraps around Babylon one last time, soft as a cotton veil dipped in honey. You return to the upper city, past guards closing gates, vendors storing scales, and scribes stretching ink-stained fingers. The temples are quiet now. The market's mostly empty. The stars have come out again, just as they always do. But tonight they feel different. Because tonight you carry with you a full day, know a full civilization's worth of numbers. Not cold, not sterile, but living dusty warm, written into bricks and baked into the bones of daily life. You sit atop the city's northern ziggurat, the one with chipped steps and a sleepy owl that doesn't seem to mind your presence. Beside you, a borrowed stylus and a flat bit of clay. Blank. And for once, no one's asking you to calculate anything. Just remember, You think back to where it all began, wading through temple courtyards where numbers governed offerings and oracles, and how those numbers led you into schools, then libraries into tunnels of tablets older than empires. You remember the moment you first saw their base 60 system, the columns that seemed so foreign but flowed with a strange elegance, multiplying without place values, dividing without decimals. And yet, it worked. You remember water clocks ticking like slow, sleepy hearts, right angles formed with ropes, solar eclipses traced with trance-like patience, planetary movements not just observed but predicted with breathtaking accuracy. And then there were the ordinary things. The grain counts, the roof repairs, the beer taxes and boundary stones and daily wages tied together by a quiet, persistent math that never needed fame to function. Historians still argue whether Babylon was the birthplace of true mathematics. But sitting here under a sky that once guided scribes and kings, you know this. They believed in numbers, they trusted them, and they used them not to dazzle, but to live. That belief, measured and baked and passed down through floods and wars, has outlived even their language. You press your stylus into the clay. Just a line, then a wedge. You've seen those shapes before, and now they're yours. Below Babylon sleeps safe in the cradle of rivers and arithmetic. And up here high above the rooftops with moonlight tracing your fingers, the numbers whisper softly. You've always been part of the pattern. The owl blinks once, then tucks its head beneath a wing. The city breathes in slow rhythm beneath you, exhaling warmth into the cooling night. Everything feels still now, softer, slower. The math has quieted. The stars don't move any faster for all we've measured them. The barley doesn't grow any quicker because we counted its stalks. But somehow, knowing we tried that, we watched and wondered and etched it all down in clay makes the world feel just a little more steady. You shift slightly on the ziggurat's worn stone, feeling the weight of the day gently drift away. The sounds are muted now, the hush of wind along the rooftops, the faint splash of water from the canal below the occasional flick of a bird's wing overhead. Even your thoughts feel rounder, simpler, like the numbers you've been tracing all this time hold timeless, gently looping. You take a deep breath, then let it out slowly. Whatever tomorrow holds, it will come. And whether or not you solve any grand equations or balance any cosmic ledgers, you'll carry a quiet truth with you. That long ago, by the banks of two mighty rivers, a people learned to count the stars, the seasons, the debts, and themselves. And they did it with grace. Now curl in close, let the hush settle. Close your eyes, rest your breath. The numbers will wait.